Take the fast lane home weekdays from 2 to 6 p.m. with Anthony Stalter, Jamie Rivers, and Carrie Davis on 101 ESPN. Two former pros and one average Joe. The fast lane is driven by Scrap Mart Metals Recycling. Hear every St. Louis Blues game right here. WXOS HD1 East St. Louis, 101 ESPN. Giving you the picture, the real big St. Louis sports picture. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
Navich, they cut it into the middle, turn it over, and Nichushkin on the trailer, they score. A rough turnover by the Blues to Rantanen, and Rantanen's going to score the hat-trick goal. Blues do not get the power play goal. They're 0 for 2 on the power play. Avs are going to bring it up ice. And now a penalty coming against the Blues.
That's going to be Kyrou, trips up Cogliano, and boy, this one was tough.
Krug shoots it, save made, and the Blues lose to the Avs by a score of 4-3.
Yeah, and that's what happens when you play a team like that. That's very opportunistic, and they can jump on your mistakes. And that's we made 4 mistakes in that game. Certainly, we made other ones, but the 4 mistakes were costly.
That's what it sounded like last night right here at your home of the Blues, 101 ESPN. They lose at 4-3 at home last night against the Colorado Avalanche. Let's start here. An inspired effort. I thought the Blues overall played a really solid game against one of the best teams in the NHL last night. And if you're somebody that remains optimistic about this team, not just getting to the playoffs, but doing something when they get there, that was actually a point in your direction. The Blues played well last night against a really good Colorado Avalanche team. Now, the Avalanche goalie, not particularly good last night. It's probably not who you'd see in a playoff series, but I'm not setting anything aside. That was an inspired effort by the Blues. That being said, this remains a team that is fragile, not in the way that they play like mentally. Last year, this was a mentally fragile team. This year, it's the way that they're constructed that is fragile in terms of them winning hockey games, because they cannot overcome their mistakes easily. This is a team that needs to play nearly perfect. Their margin for error is razor thin to be able to win hockey games. So, when you have the booch turnover that leads directly to a goal in your own end, it can't happen. That is the type of thing that this team cannot overcome. And then when you compound that with Kyrou's penalty, which was a really bad penalty in this spot. Guys, I'm a Kyrou defender. It's a bad penalty. You can't do it there. You got to move your feet. I appreciate him attempting to play defense. But if you're going to do it in that spot, you can't just hip check there. You got to move your feet and play defense. And then the third thing, it was a 3 strikes and you're out approach last night. When you have power play opportunities against that team, you got to capitalize on them. And the Blues last night went 0 for 3 on the power play. So boom, boom, boom. Bad turnover, bad penalty, no power play goals on the night. Yeah, that's not a way that you're going to be able to capitalize against a team like that. I also thought it wasn't one of Benner's best nights that he's had recently. So you got all those things working against you. You still played a really competitive game at home against one of the top teams in the West. But yeah, that's how you're going to lose a game like that.
Yeah, and when you tell me that there is a retooling, rebuilding team, and that they're playing against a top team in the Western Conference, I expect that what's going to happen, where there are going to be the mistakes. We've seen those mistakes for the most part of the season for the St. Louis Blues, where they end up making those costly mistakes that lead to goals. I thought you're right. I thought the effort last night, it was an inspired effort. They came out, they showed up, they were hoping to get 2 points, and they played really well. But they continue to make just those small mistakes, which I expect to see night in, night out, where they will make that one turnover or a couple of turnovers that are potentially going to be costly. And typically, Benner's been able to bail them out this season. Last night, that wasn't the case. Last night, it was they turned the puck over in bad spots. You take the bad penalty from Jordan Kyrou, and you send the awesome Colorado Avalanche power play to the ice, and they end up taking advantage of it. That's kind of what I expect from this Blues team, and that's what I expect when they go against one of those top teams in the Western Conference. I was impressed with the effort last night. I said yesterday on the show, like, what's it going to take for me to buy in? I say, it's probably going to be a tough game against the Avalanche. If they play inspired hockey, I'll be happy. As long as it's not a didn't show up, didn't skate. You would have liked to get a point out of that one, but sometimes you just got to tip your cap to the better team.
Sure.
And that's what happened last night.
It is, and now you move forward, and it's like, okay, how do we regroup, right? What is the next piece going to be in this puzzle for the Blues season? I didn't feel like last night was a step in the wrong direction at all. I said yesterday, this is the least important game of the next 4 that you're going to play. The 2 games against Minnesota and Vegas, those are directly head-to-head against teams that you're trying to compete with in the Western Conference for a playoff spot. You got to win those. Must-win games, no doubt about it. And your next game tomorrow night against Ottawa, that's a terrible team, man. A truly horrific team. You have to win that one as well. Colorado was a measuring stick game. And honestly, you measured out pretty well. You're a little below them. We all knew that prior to the game. And you left feeling like, okay, they're a better team than us. If we played our best hockey, if the Blues played an A game and the Avs played a C game, and I think they were pretty close to that last night, you could probably beat them. But that's what it takes. You have to be on your A game, and they have to be on their C game. And the Blues last night were not on their A game. For most of it, they were pretty good. And then you have the 3 situations: Booch turnover, Kyrou penalty, not scoring on the power play. That's enough. That's enough for you not to be at the A game. They probably were at like a B- last night. So now we get into the big picture conversations about where the Blues are at. One of the conversations is on Jordan Kyrou. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line to get involved in the show. The YouTube chat is at youtube.com/101ESPNSTL. We are already getting all of the texts. Kyrou's got to go. You can't play Kyrou anymore. He's got to be out of the lineup. Get Kyrou out of here. All of these coming from the 636-314-618, coming from all over the place. I don't know what you do with the lines after last night. I genuinely don't know. Because by the second period, I believe it was Jordan Kyrou on the second line with Pavel Buchnevich. Jake Neighbors finally, after all this time, was given an opportunity on the top line with Robert Thomas.
That line looked awesome last night.
It worked. So it was Jake Neighbors with Braden Shin and Robert Thomas on that top line, and it was a good line against that opponent. T-Bone, the Blues are expected to take the ice coming up here in about 15 minutes. What do you think the lines will? What do you think the lines should look like today?
So I think you're still going to see Shen, Thomas, and Neighbors be the top line. I think they'll stick with that considering it looked really good last night. And then I think you have to stick with Booch at center, and I think they'll probably go back to Booch, Saad, and Kyrou. I think that's what you do with the second line. And then that third line is where I think it gets interesting. I think you stick with Hayes, Bolduc, and then is it going to be Kapanen? Will they move Dean to a wing? That's really the one that I don't know about. Is now the time to get Zachary Dean into the lineup? And we've talked about it. Look, they weren't going to change the lines when they were on that win streak. It's not what they're going to do. But Kapanen wasn't really noticeable last night. I thought Bolduc was fine for the most part last night.
He's just going to make a play every night that you look at and you're like, this might cost us the game. And you got to be okay with that because he's young and he's playing in a playoff type of an atmosphere right now. That's going to be what you have to live with if you're going to commit to him being in the lineup regularly.
Granted, you're probably going to get that same thing with Zach Dean, too, if you insert him into the lineup. I would say what they probably do is they probably end up going with Zach Dean on that third line with Hayes, with Bolduc. I think that's what they do. I think that's what the third line is going to ultimately be. I think they will pull Kasperi Kapanen out of the lineup, and then the fourth line will be the same. But I think it's basically going to look like it did at the end of last night. And the only reason I say Bolduc probably stays in the lineup is they had him on that second power play unit. And I know the power play didn't convert last night. I'd still like to see them run him out there on that second unit and see if it generates some offense, not just use the one-game sample with the Colorado Avalanche.
I think they're going to go back to Thomas with Kyrou. That would be my prediction, is that they go back to Thomas, Kyrou, and Shin on the top line. They try to balance this thing out, and they go back to Neighbors on the second line. I think that's what you're going to see, and the reason why is because they have been so unbelievably committed to those combinations. They view it not as Thomas with Shin. They view it as Thomas with Kyrou. Those are the two guys that they're building around. And if you're a Kyrou defender, you'll look at it and you'll say, look at the underlying metrics. When those two guys aren't on the ice, the Blues stink at 5-on-5. When they're on the ice, they're at least a representative team across the league. And it's true. That is the case. The underlying numbers at 5-on-5 would suggest the Blues are at their best when they've got Thomas and Kyrou on the ice. I would also add this. I think the Blues are just at their best right now when Thomas is on the ice. And if it ends up being Thomas, Shin, and Neighbors, I think you're going to see that line being clearly the best that the Blues have to offer. I just think at this point, it is worth trying something new. I have said all along, I would go with Jake Neighbors on that top line. I would move Buchnevich from center. I don't think you're getting the best out of him right now by having him at center. I would drop Shin back down. I know he's been playing better on that top unit. They clearly want Jake Neighbors to stay on the right side. And I think the best way to utilize your top six right now, Shin at center with Jordan Kyrou and Brandon Saad, Buchnevich on the wing for Robert Thomas and Jake Neighbors. And that is your top six configuration. You keep Bolduc on that third line with Kevin Hayes. And if you want to, you can get Cappy out of there and go with a guy like Zach Dean, put him on the third line. I would use him as a winger, the way that they did with Thomas when he first got into the league, and just take off some of that pressure, put him with Kevin Hayes. But that's the way that I would do it.
Yeah, I like that. I like the idea of going with Thomas Booch in Neighbors. They're in such a tough spot because they don't have a second line center because of what you said. Shen has been better on the wing since he's moved back to that top line. He's looked pretty good. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're running through the numbers. He hadn't scored in quite some time when he was at center. So
6 weeks.
Yeah, that's quite some time.
Not an exaggeration. It had literally been 6 weeks.
I think you have to keep him on the wing because he's playing well on the wing. And if that's the case, I think you're just stuck with Buchnevich at center. And that's why I think you have to just continue with what they did last night in the end, where you just have Neighbors on that top line. Because I love what he's doing on the top line. And as we've seen, lately it has not been working out for Jordan Kyrou. He has not been playing well. So I think you move him down to that second line. You have him with Booch. You kind of make them, they like to do those pairings where they've got the two guys at forward. I think that's now your new pairing, is it's Booch and Kyrou. And then you figure out who's going to be on the wing with them. Right now it's going to be Brandon Saad. Honestly, I don't mind that. And then you figure out that third line, whether you want to do Dean for Kapanen or Dean for Bolduc, or hell, you just want to stick with that third line. I think you have to stick with Jake Neighbors, Braden Shen, and Robert Thomas on that top line.
And honestly,
that's the only thing I would say. From there, I don't care.
I know that would technically be your third line. I think you could make an argument that in terms of usage, it's actually your fourth line. Your fourth line right now is playing like a top nine group of forwards. And it's not your traditional group, but with Sonny and with Toropchenko, who now has 14 goals, I believe it is, on the season. And I think this is a team that, like, when you watch Nathan Walker play right now, he's just better than the Blues gave him credit for these first, 5 years of his career. He's a really good player. He's exactly what they've been missing. This fourth line is what Alex has been talking about for 3 years. They finally have a group that you can put onto the ice in the third period, whether you're up or down, and they'll get the job done for you. So that is essentially the third line for this group right now. And then Hayes, while not technically being a fourth line center, I do think you can utilize that line as a fourth line unit right now based on how you're playing them in the third period. You could also just situationally decide how you want to utilize those guys. And if you want to double shift somebody, you can. So the Blues back in action tomorrow. They are on the ice coming up in about 15 minutes or so. We'll talk to Chris Kerber, the voice of the Blues, coming up in 15 minutes here on BK and Ferrario. If you haven't found out by now, Alex is out. He's feeling a little bit under the weather. He came in yesterday, tried to play hurt, couldn't do it again. Had a temperature, had a fever. Hopefully our guys are back in the saddle tomorrow to be ready to go for us here as we get out on remote tomorrow for the show.
Road trip.
Tanner Hendrickson is in for Alex Ferrario. We had Bradford Bruns on the board today for us. As I mentioned, Chris Kerber, the voice of the Blues, will join us in just a little bit. But coming up next, there's a quote that T-Bone mentioned to me from Ollie Marmol earlier today about the Cardinals' outfield configuration. I wonder what this means for the center fielder job that seems to be up for grabs. We'll talk about that next here on 101 ESPN.
It's time for a DraftKings at Casino Queen Redbird report on 101 ESPN.
Brooke Grimsley here for your Redbird report. The Cardinals split their doubleheader yesterday, first beating the Marlins 11-10, then losing to the Mets 3-1. Rough day for Kyle Gibson on the mound in the first game. In 5 innings, he gave up 7 hits and 5 earned runs while striking out 1. His spring ERA now is 10.80. Against the Mets, Lance Lynn tossing 3 1/3, giving up 3 hits, 2 earned runs, and with 4 strikeouts and 4 walks. Your Redbirds with another evening game today facing the Nationals. First pitch is at 5:05 with Steven Matz on the mound.
The Redbird Report is presented by DraftKings at Casino Queen. Play, stay, dine at DraftKings at Casino Queen.
Hey, it's BK. I got to tell you about my friends over at Victory Men's Health. They're going to help you out with one of the options that they've got available for you today. Whether you have issues with erectile dysfunction, you want to get checked out your low testosterone, you want a little bit of help with the weight loss, we all have something that we could use a little bit of help with when it comes to unlocking our inner champion. Do you sense that you have one of these potential symptoms for low testosterone? Increased body fat, a change in mood, maybe you wake up in the morning, you're just not feeling like yourself, a decrease in memory. All of these are potential symptoms for low testosterone. So go over to Victory Men's Health today. They'll get you checked out, take that lab draw kit, and they'll see if that is something that is affecting you. You can go over there today at one of their 4 great locations across the St. Louis area in O'Fallon, Missouri, O'Fallon, Illinois, Town and Country, or in Sunset Hills. That is their 4th location that they've opened just last month. They opened it up. Maybe you've been to one of these locations previously. It felt like you walked into like this old, groggy, broken down hospital. Not at Victory Men's Health. So check them out today. Victory Men's Health and victorymenshealth.com.
We're right back to more of it. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
So there was an interesting quote earlier today from Ollie Marmol over in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch about the Cardinals' outfield configuration. Ollie said, quote, "We're weighing that question about if Donovan could be in the outfield and what would that look like. At the end of the day, it's about figuring out what gives you the best combination of both outfield defense and offense, where you're not just chasing offense at the expense of defense." And then came the money quote. Gone down that road before. The classic, I'm not doing that again. Been there, done that. It was not worth the situation that we ended up having last year in the outfield. So, T-Bone, that to me suggests, yeah, listen, I appreciate what Alec Burleson has done. He has made himself a better outfielder. He will not be our regular starting left fielder this year. That is essentially my takeaway from that quote via Ollie Marmol in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch earlier today. That being said, it does put some pressure on the center field job if they believe that Brendan Donovan can be their close to everyday left fielder while Lars Nootbaar is out. Your 2 options are almost certainly going to be for that job: Dylan Carlson or Victor Scott. T-Bone, I think we come out on different sides on this. I personally think they're leaning towards Dylan Carlson being their starting center fielder and just taking the path of least resistance on opening day. How do you view this when it relates to that quote from Ollie Marmol?
I view it as that they're going to carry Victor Scott. And I felt that way even yesterday, even more because they started him in center field while Carlson was in left field. And they've done that 2 or 3 times now at this point, and they continue to get him at bats. Now, I do find it interesting that he played the whole game yesterday compared to Carlson, who did get pulled for Mike Antico. But I still view it that it's Victor Scott's job, because if they want to go with the best defense while also balancing offense, I think it's your best defense is probably Donovan or Carlson in left, and Victor Scott is the center fielder. And I would lean towards Donovan in left field because the way I've at least pictured this lineup all season long is that you are going to have 7 spots that you feel really good about offensively. We all know who they are. Really, the 2 spots that you were like, okay, we're probably going to be below league average, if not league average offensively, is shortstop with Mason Wynn and center field with Tommy Edman. Well, I feel like if you're going to go with, okay, let's keep center field in that spot of, okay, it's going to be like league average offensively, you can go with Victor Scott or Dylan Carlson. But right now, guys, I truly believe Victor Scott's the better player than Dylan Carlson. He's elite defensively. He made a diving play yesterday. His speed is elite, causing havoc on the base paths. And maybe my favorite part here, he's hitting right-handed pitching compared to Dylan Carlson. So I think that's their best path is with him in center. And the reason that I lean towards Donovan in left field is if you go with Victor Scott in center and Carlson in left, now it is 6 spots in a lineup that we're talking about offensively because Carlson's below league average. So I think they're going to stick with that 7 mantra, I would call it, where they're going to feel like they're above league average offensively, if not elite offensively in those spots. And it comes down to center field and short, and I still lean towards Victor Scott. Otherwise, why continue to run Carlson out in left field? Why does he need reps in left field if he's going to be the starting center fielder for the St. Louis Cardinals? If that was the case, they would just be running him out there in left field or in center field. They know he can play a corner. They know he can play right field. I think they're putting him in left because he's competing against Brendan Donovan for that starting job in left field. And the reason I think they want to put Donovan in the field is it allows for a bat at the DH spot and Alec Burleson, who's playing really well this spring, to start.
Yeah, I guess my retort would just be we hadn't seen Victor Scott in a major league spring training game since last, I think, Wednesday. And so yesterday, yeah, he gets the start in center field because it had been 6 days since we had seen him in a major league spring training game. So you're going to get him that opportunity when Dylan Carlson had been over the weekend getting those opportunities for the Cardinals. So it's a no-lose proposition. Yeah, we're getting Dylan Carlson the at-bats. We're getting an opportunity here defensively for Victor Scott to be in center field. Victor Scott, when he gets to the big leagues, is playing center field. Yeah. There's no question about it. That will be his spot. Meanwhile, Dylan Carlson this season, he's not going to be your everyday center fielder for the entirety of the year. They believe that, at least. At some point, you probably have Victor Scott, but at some point before then, even if they were going to go Dylan Carlson at the beginning of the season, it's going to be Tommy Edman. Like, that's their plan for this upcoming year. So I don't think they mind getting Carlson some at-bats in left. Probably at some point you want to get him some at-bats in right as well. Just some opportunities to just track the ball out there a couple of times in a game situation. I think that's what's happening. I think the Cardinals are just going out there and playing out the string and saying, hey, Victor, get as many at-bats as you can. Continue to show us that you're ready for the big leagues. And then when we get to the end of the spring training, I think the Cardinals are going to do what they typically do. They're going to say, Victor, thanks for showing us everything you had in spring. Go down. Continue to prove it down in AAA. Scott and Sajaci will be the first 2 call-ups for the Cardinals, depending on what position opens up. And those will be the guys that get the first cracks at the big leagues whenever there are significant injuries at the big league level. So I think that's the way that they're going to go about it. I disagree with it. I think Victor Scott should be your opening day center fielder, but I think that's the way that the Cardinals are going to operate.
And the reason I still am confident that they're going to go with Victor Scott in center is everybody that is thinking it's going to be Carlson, you, Alex, anybody that's skeptical is, well, they like the path of least resistance. And for the most part, generally that has been true. But I look at Jordan Walker last year. Guys, the path of least resistance for Walker last year was go to AAA because they felt like at the time last year they had 4 starting outfielders.
They had an injury.
No, they still had Carlson, O'Neill, and they still had Newbar.
Newbar was hurt early last year.
No, he was on the opening day roster. He was on the opening. He got hurt on opening day, didn't he? Wasn't it a sprained ankle?
I think he was hurt but on opening day.
But Walker made the opening day roster. And if you put Walker on the opening roster at the time when you felt like you had 4 starting outfielders, then you knew that Jordan Walker was going to be playing every single day. And if that's the case, like that was definitely not the path of least resistance. I truly believe they're going to go with Victor Scott because they know he's the better center fielder right now. And you know what? Worst case scenario, he struggles. You can pull the plug on it 2 weeks in and go, you know what? It turns out spring training was spring training. You haven't adjusted. Major league pitching is tougher once you get into the regular season because guys are no longer working on things. You just send them down to AAA, and now you go to Carlson in center field and you figure out left. Best case scenario is Victor Scott is like Michael. I'm not saying Michael Harris in terms of like power and stuff, but he ends up skipping AAA entirely, never looks back, and all of a sudden he's your starting center fielder from game number 1 to game 162.
And that's exactly why when March 28th rolls around, who gives you the best opportunity, who gives you the best chance to run down those balls in Chavez Ravine at Petco Park? Let's say it doesn't go particularly well after week 1. What is the worst thing that could potentially happen? Okay, so Scott gets shipped down. You have more of an influx of Carlson starts in center field, and Donovan mans that position in left field. That way you still have the robust option of a Burleson at DH as a late game, opportunity guy there to be able to provide pop off of the bench. There's just no downside to the first week of the season, given where you're playing, the competition, and the athleticism required in those ballparks to roll with Victor Scott right off the bat.
I would tell you there is downside. The downside is potentially setting back his development. And again, I am arguing for something I do not believe. I don't think this is the way that the Cardinals should operate. I agree with both of you. I think that their best case scenario early on in the season is to just bring Victor Scott onto the opening day roster, have him play in center field, tell him what you've told Mason Wynn, and I appreciate that Ollie continues to say this. Hey, listen, Mason is here for defense, and we are going to continue to support him no matter what because he's not here for his offense. It is purely about, can you please play excellent defense for us at shortstop, and we'll figure out the rest. We've got a lineup that can cover for the fact that we've got one or two spots that aren't great offensively. They're good enough now to be able to handle that at short and in center field. That being said, I think the Cardinals will tell you, and maybe they're right on this, we don't want to set Victor Scott back because we view him as a huge piece of what we're trying to build in the long term. And we don't want him to fake it till he makes it at the big league level, to get into some bad habits that ultimately set him back for the next 2 or 3 years. I don't know if that would happen or not. I personally think he's good enough, he's talented enough, and he wins with his speed enough. He'll figure it out, and he'll be able to adjust at the big league level. He's already doing it in spring training. But maybe he gets into some habits similar to what Walker did last year, where he's just ambushing the first pitch fastball, and then you get into the start of the regular season, and they're just throwing him slider after slider after slider, and he's basically getting himself out regularly. I don't know. I would deal with it because of the defensive upgrade in center field, but I think that's probably the way that they're going to go. I do not think they're going to take him on the opening day roster. By the way, you were right, T-Bone. It was not opening day last year that Nootbaar was out. I think he got hurt in the second or third game of the season.
But to that, since you're arguing for the Cardinals, this would be my counterpoint to it. Do you feel worse off about Jordan Walker? Do you feel like he set him back? Like, if you truly believe in a player's skill set, and there is a little hiccup at the major league level.
But do you feel worse about Dylan Carlson, and did they set him back because of the way that they approached him early on?
I don't think so. I think Carlson, because it would be one thing if Carlson really struggled in year one. You know, like if Carlson's, what was his first full year? 2021. If 2021 he hit like he did last year, which was like 210, didn't hit for any powers, was terrible against right-handed pitching, and that continued, I would probably say that. Guys, he was really good in 2021. Yeah. For whatever reason, baseball has adjusted to Dylan Carlson, and either he, A, hasn't made the adjustments, or he's truly just been hurt, and that's been the bigger issue. I would argue it's a little bit of both. Yeah. But you mentioned the Jordan Walker scenario. I would say, do the Cardinals really feel like Walker all of a sudden is not in a better position now? Like, I'm expecting this kid to be awesome this season. The Cardinals are expecting that. And if they're going to approach it with Mason Wynn, and look, I get it, Wynn had his cup of coffee at AAA and Scott has not. Well, if you're basically saying, well, we're not worried about Wynn's offense, and it's just like, can you go out there and give us great defense at shortstop? I'd argue the same could totally be said for Victor Scott. Like, worst case scenario for Scott is he turns into Harrison Bader, and that was a win for the St. Louis Cardinals.
I didn't make much of yesterday, Victor Scott being in center field. I will make a little bit more of it if it happens again today. We'll see what happens with the Cardinals lineup. They play later on this evening, so no lineup this morning. We'll probably get that right around the start of the fast lane. Certainly pay attention to where they have Victor Scott, Dylan Carlson, etc. set up to play in that one. He's Tanner Hendrickson. Bradford Brun's in today. Alex is out. He's out sick. Hopefully be back with us tomorrow. We will be broadcasting tomorrow from Cybergs in O'Fallon, Illinois, where the NCAA tournament's going to be on all day long, Thursday and Friday. Come on out, see us. On Thursday, again, Cybergs in O'Fallon, Illinois. On Friday, we'll be broadcasting live from Helen Fitzgerald's on Lindbergh. Come on out, enjoy some food, cold Bud Light, 101 ESPN giveaways. So much more. All the details are available for you at 101ESPN.com. Coming up next, we continue talking about the Blues game last night and what lies ahead for them with Chris Kerber, the voice of the Blues, here on 101 ESPN.
The NCAA men's basketball tournament is on, and you can join 101 ESPN to watch the games this Thursday and Friday. Join BK and Ferrario and the Fast Lane live from Cybergs in O'Fallon, Illinois on Thursday and Helen Fitzgerald's on Friday. Come enjoy some food, a cold Bud Light, 101 giveaways, plenty of screens to watch all the games and more with BK and Ferrario and the Fast Lane live from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. Get more details at 101ESPN.com.
Brought to you by Bud Light. Easy to drink, easy to enjoy.
Hey, when you call Classic Air Care and they come to your house, you may see them walk in. They've got that great blue shirt, but you might see a patch of another company on the sleeve. Now, what's that about? Well, it's actually really kind of a cool story. If another company is struggling, or maybe Classic Air Care has taken over that company, they do what they can to keep the employees. And they know the pride that those employees took in the previous company. So you know what they do? A lot of times they'll take a patch from that company and they'll put it on the sleeve. So it represents the company that was there, that's been servicing the community. And Classic Air Care wants you to know that it's that same quality care that they bring to the table, because they're bringing those employees along. And you know another cool part? If somebody's with a company for 20 years and it's now under Classic Air Care, they keep their tenure. They keep their seniority. It's really a cool thing. They treat their employees well. And that's why when they come to your house, you know you're going to be treated with that same pride. They want to get the work done well. They want to get it done right. They want to educate you. They want to make sure the price is right, and they want to make sure you are comfortable in your home. That is why you call Classic Air Care. You can also schedule an appointment online at classicaircare.com, and air is A-I-R-E, classic A-I-R-E, care.com, and schedule an appointment today. Get that furnace serviced, get the air conditioner serviced, and ready for the spring and summer, and get on board with Classic Air Care and classicaircare.com.
Blues play on ESPN. The wait is over. Tomorrow, Blues and Senators. Pre-game at 5, puck drop at 6. Shoots, he scores! This is your exclusive home for Blues hockey. 101 ESPN. This is exactly where you want to be, listening to us. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
Bring out the Zamboni!
It's time for Curbside with the voice of the Blues, Chris Kerber. Brought to you by Scott Lee Heating Company, a proud Mitsubishi Electric Elite contractor.
Alongside Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. Alex out today, feeling a little bit under the weather. Hopefully we get him back in studio with us tomorrow. We'll be broadcasting live tomorrow from O'Fallon, Illinois, out at Cyberg's, where we're going to be watching all of the NCAA tournament games. Come on out, say hello to us. We say hello right now to Chris Kerber. He's the voice of the Blues. He joins us via the 101 ESPN hotline, coming off of the Blues' 4-3 loss last night at home against the Colorado Avalanche. An inspired effort, but just one too many mistakes. Curbs, appreciate the time as always, man. What was your big takeaway from last night's game against Colorado?
You got beat by a better team, BK. That's kind of the way I look at it. I thought the Blues played really well. The four key mistakes that Drew Bannister talked about, you know, it still makes it a head scratcher when you realize that it's some of your top players and the guys that are supposed to be your top players making them. But that's going to happen when you're playing that kind of a team. And you know, you look at the window that Colorado's in, and they are clearly in a championship window, and that's fueled by the core of a first overall pick in McKinnon, a 10th overall pick in Rantanen, and a 4th overall pick in Makar. And they've hit on all of them, and they've hit superstar levels with all of them. And in the end, they just had better players than the St. Louis Blues have, and the Blues have to be a sum of their parts, and not all the parts can continue to just get it done. So I do think, though, to be honest with you, and I talked to Colton Parayko after the game about this, that's not the kind of loss that you lose momentum. You know, like it's not the loss like you had to Columbus right before the break or something like that. It's the kind of loss where you can still feel pretty good about the game. You just played a better team and they beat you.
Yeah, 100% agree with that, Curbs. And one thing that they did in the middle of that game last night was they moved Jake Neighbors up to the top line with Braden Shen and Robert Thomas. We haven't seen any line combinations yet. They're out at Centene right now practicing. Do you think we're going to continue to see Jake Neighbors on that top line after the way that line performed last night?
You know what I really liked about that move, Tanner? And look, there's two ways to look at it if you're really blunt and honest, and it is they move Jake Neighbors up or they move Kyrou off it. And Jordan Kyrou, and I think you have to look at it both ways. One, Jake Neighbors is playing well enough, and look at what he did. You could see his speed, his effort, his go-get-itness. Jordan Kyrou was getting outmatched. Jordan Kyrou was turning the puck over. There was the one play coming up the ice, and Jordan Kyrou had the straight legs going and couldn't catch Rantanen, but then when the puck got turned over by Colorado, all of a sudden the spring of the step was there again. So there's another level to Jordan's game, and it's going to have to come, in my opinion, in the second half of a shift, right? I'll get to that in a moment. But to me, I think you might want to stay with it, and see where it goes, because he really just brought a good work ethic there to it. Now, does that create mismatch down the line a little bit? Maybe. It depends. I want to see more from, Bolduc and shooting the puck and see if he can start sniping a little bit. But I like that change. And I guess in the last couple of games, guys, the power play, the game before and in that game, you see a coach that's not afraid to make some adjustments when he needs to make them if it's not going well, and that's a good sign.
Kerbs, I got into a bit of hot water last night with the Kyrou stands on Twitter, and I know Twitter's not real life. It was probably like 10 people, right? Like, there's thousands of Blues fans out there, so I don't want to make more of this than it is. But I was a little surprised by how many people just, no matter what, will continue to defend him. I have, generally speaking, been a Kyrou guy. Like, I think he gets a little bit more criticism here in St. Louis than maybe he deserves at times. That being said, I don't know that he's played his best games recently, Kerbs. In the month of March, 2 goals, 1 assist. He's a -8. He has not been a positive on the ice in terms of plus-minus, and I know it's a flawed stat, but he has not been a positive on the ice so far in this month. What have you seen from Kyrou's game in the last 10 or 15 games for the Blues?
I see tentativeness. I think... And you still have to keep, I know when people say he's a young player, Robert Thomas is really coming into his own this year, right? And it's his 6th year. Okay, Jordan Kyrou is a couple years behind that. And keep in mind that when some of those really key developmental years for him turning pro happened to be right when there was COVID, there was shortened season, things were wonky, right? So I still think in some cases we're seeing that, work through. But I don't know. Maybe somebody could look at me and say, Kerbs, that's just an excuse. And maybe it just depends on how you look at it. But, Al McInnes talked to me once about fitness, and he was talking about it. It's something you build. Like, you just don't say, okay, I'm going to get in shape for next season. You might get in good shape for one season, and then you continue your fitness, and then you build on that the next year. And it's a process of building. Now, one thing that's never been talked about because he comes in camp in shape is the fitness of Jordan Kyrou. But the reason I bring it up is the more NHL fit you are, the better you can be in the second half of a shift. Okay, so you're not straight-legging it trying to catch Rantanen. And if you guys watch that game, the determination of Rantanen, he's going across the ice, going in hard. And this is a 40-goal scorer and a 90-point player. He'll be a 100-point player before the end of the season. And Jordan Kyrou has the ability to be a 40-goal scorer and an 80 to 100-point player, and especially playing with a guy like Robert Thomas. The question is can he make plays and stop turning the puck over? And it's making the smart plays with the puck. And when he dangles and when he does control the puck with assertiveness, you see his skill. I just don't think he does it enough. So to me, I just think I'd like to see more assertiveness, more definitiveness, more decisiveness, more predictability in his game because he has the skill. Now, the other aspect, BK, real quick on that is,
sure.
You signed him to an $8 million contract. Well, that's a big deal, okay? That's a big statement. So the expectations come with that, and he's got to match those expectations. And there are some games he does, some games he doesn't. And until he gets that consistency more in his game like we're seeing this year from Robert Thomas, I think some of the lightning rod's going to be there, and some of it is deserved. So it's on him to really get there. But you're talking in the last couple games a guy that was taken off the top power play unit, removed from a top line. That's a look inward kind of thing. If that bothers you, you'll start bringing it more, and the Blues do need more from him.
We're talking to Chris Kerber, the voice of the Blues here on 101 ESPN. By the way, there is an update from Morning Skate. Luke Korak tweeting these out. The practice lines going through rush lines today. Shin, Thomas, and neighbors is the top line today at morning skate. Second line is Saad, Booch, and Kyrou. Third line is, as it was, Bolduc, Hayes, and Kapanen. There is a bit of a change on the fourth line for now. We'll see if this is just maintenance day, but it's Toropchenko, Dean, and Walker skating as the fourth line today. And then defensively, Torrey Krug is missing at morning skate this morning. So Scandella is skating with Falk, and Perunovic is skating with Kessel.
And Kerber,
Torrey Krug got hurt last night. There was a play. He finished the game, but he got nicked up on a play. So whether it's a maintenance day or there's something more to it, we'll find out when we get there. But there was a play had fallen down near the net, and so we'll see where that one is. And, the loss does give – at some point in time, you got to throw Dean in there. You don't want to send him back down to have to recall him because that just burns that last call-up that you've got. But typically a loss gives you an opportunity to make a move. We'll see if that one sticks.
And Kerbs, the one I want to focus on here is that second line. They've got Buchnevich centering that second line with Kyrou and Saad. They've recently moved Buch back to center. It's been 5-6 games. What have you seen from Buch when he's playing the center position so far?
Listen, I think he's fine at center. The actual winning of the faceoffs is a bit of an issue, but he's able to use that body and get throughout the puck. He had a brain fart last night on that pass to the middle rather than going up the wall into a wide open, Brandon Saad. But guys, it's a lot easier when we're watching on TV or from high in the press box to see that open guy. A little bit different when the speed and the size of the Avalanche are breathing down your neck like a bull, right? So, but that's a play that's just got to be a better play from a key piece of your top six. I like him, Tanner, at center so far. He gives them an option. Braden Shen, I think, has been good on the line with Robert Thomas. But they're going to need some work. I think Brandon Saad has played some of his best hockey of the year over the last few weeks. And then we just got done talking about Jordan Kyrou. So the Blues don't have a ton of options until somebody else starts lighting it up. You've got, I think, 2 points in 2 of 17 games now from Kapanen. Kevin Hayes has been on a decent streak. You're getting some offense, and you actually get some good play. Not a lot of offense yet from Bolduc. Like, they just got to keep putting the players' numbers in the grinder until they find ways to work. And, they did get 3 goals last night. They just couldn't hold on to it.
All right, Kerbs, final question that I've got for you. The Blues go into this next 3-game stretch with games against Ottawa, a team that's selecting right now in the top 5. Minnesota, a team that you're directly battling with for that final wild card spot. And then Vegas, the team that is right there for the wild card spot as well. I think all 3 of these are, arguably must-win games for the Blues. The last time that Ottawa won a game in regulation was February 22nd. It's been a minute. They're not a very good hockey team, to put it mildly. Do you think that's fair to say that these are must-win games? Each of these next 3 are must-win games for the Blues if they're going to make it to the postseason?
Yeah, especially. Yeah, I would say if not must win, you've got to find a way. You got to get 2 points against Ottawa, right? Like to me, this is clearly like a 5 out of 6 kind of trip, right?
Yep.
Like maybe there's a shootout loss or maybe there's something in there, but yeah, 4 points at minimum, 6 at best, but 5 would be great. But you can. That's the thing. To your point, you really should beat Ottawa if you're going to be a serious playoff team. Okay, so that's number one. If they play if they play against Ottawa the way they played last night, they should beat Ottawa. All right. Then you've got the head-to-head matchups where you have complete control over whether or not you leapfrog Minnesota. And Vegas is about to go on a nasty road trip with this St. Louis to Minnesota and Winnipeg and Edmonton. They got a nasty road trip coming up.
LA's got a tough one right now as well, Kerbs. They're in the midst of a really tough portion of their schedule too. Yeah, once they get through Chicago there. So, I agree with you that, you got, 12 games to go now, 13 games to go. These head-to-head matchups are going to be real key because of the 4-point swing. So I like the way you're thinking. The only hesitation I get sometimes I've never, okay, it's only must-win when you're facing elimination. Sure. But you're right. If you're going to have a legitimate shot, that this has got to be a 5 out of 6 kind of trip. LA's next 6 games: Minnesota, Tampa, Vancouver, Edmonton. They do have one against Calgary, but then on the road against Winnipeg as well. It's a really tough stretch against a lot of legitimate contenders in there. 5 of the 6 are in the Western Conference as well. 4 of them battling for Western Conference playoff spots. So not an easy road to go there. And the Blues, meanwhile, have outside of Minnesota and Vegas, this is the easier portion of their schedule. You got Calgary, you got San Jose, Wednesday. You got Ottawa. You got a real chance to be able to make up a little bit of ground right now if the Blues are able to take advantage. Hey, Kerbs, appreciate the time as always, man. Thanks so much for hopping on with us today. We'll talk with you again next week. Enjoy the game tomorrow in Ottawa.
All right, guys, have an awesome time with the start of the tournament. We'll talk to you next week.
Absolutely. That's Chris Kerber, voice of the Blues, joining us as he does each and every Wednesday here on BK and Ferrario. He will be on the call tomorrow night for Blues versus the Senators. Pregame for that one a little early tomorrow for Blues versus Senators, an East Coast game starting at 5 o'clock. Coming up next, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. We'll get to questions and answers here on 101 ESPN.
Kickstart your mornings with the opening drive on 101 ESPN. Get in the know first on everything St. Louis sports with Brooke Grimsley, Dan McLaughlin, and Randy Carricker. The opening drive, weekday mornings from 7 to 10 on 101 ESPN.
The opening drive is presented by Sumner One.
free tickets for the show right now, either at 101ESPN.com or on your 101 mobile app.
So come and get it. 101 ESPN Sports Center.
Avs ambush Blues late. Good morning. I'm Bradford Bruns with your Sports Center update, driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Last night at Enterprise, St. Louis could not hang on against visiting Colorado. Mikko Rantanen and company surged past the note 4-3. The Blues currently sit 6th in the Central Division, entering tomorrow's battle versus Ottawa. Puck drop unfolds just after 6 on 101 ESPN. Baseball, the first game of the 2024 season has gone final South Korea style. The Dodgers turned back San Diego 5-2. Mookie Betts and Shohei Ohtani recorded 2 hits apiece, while Tyler Glasnow started for LA and went 5 innings. As the afternoon comes to a close, the Cardinals tackled the Nats. The Sports Center update was driven by Johnny Londoff. Find new roads and shop 24/7 at Londoff.com and LondoffAutoplex.com. Are you kidding me?
They are St. Louis. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN. You've got questions, we may have the answers. Maybe. It's BK and Ferrario's Questions and Answers on 101 ESPN.
314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for questions and answers. You get us a question, we will give you an answer here on BK and Ferrario. From the 314, guys, do you see the Chicago Bears drafting somebody like, I don't know, Jaden Daniels later on and rolling with Tyson Bagent as the quarterback, with how promising Bagent could be for the Bears? No.
Yeah.
What?
Sure can't. No.
Hold on.
Absolutely not.
That
No.
text really say Tyson, how promising Tyson Bagent
right.
looked.
Yes, sir.
Didn't this guy go to like D3 College of the Mind school or something?
Yep.
No, they're going to draft Caleb Williams because the ceiling on him is real. Bagent, there is no ceiling.
Did you see, what's his face? Keenan Allen is at the USC Pro Day today.
No, I did
in
not
his
see
Bears
that.
gear. I love it.
How about that?
I love it. Good for him.
Hopefully.
Yeah, Caleb Williams will be the starting quarterback for the Bears week 1 of the 2024 season. The draft starts at number 2. And I don't know what's going to happen there with the Commanders. I don't know if they're going to go Daniels. I don't know if they're going to go Drake May. Maybe they pull a shocker and they go J.J. McCarthy. I have no idea.
Gosh.
The betting favorite right now is Jaden Daniels, and I find it to be really interesting that a shorter, slider, similar player to Justin Fields is probably going to go number 2 overall, maybe number 3, definitely by number 4 in this year's NFL draft. And nobody was willing to give up more than a 6th-round pick for Justin Fields. I just find that disconnect to be odd to me. They have similar strengths, similar weaknesses when they go back and they get pressured.
Right.
They both had huge issues with taking way too many sacks. They both have big arms with a lot of deep balls that ended up making them successful. They were both in college offenses that were able to get the best out of them in their final seasons at those respective universities. They both win with their legs as much as they do with their arms. There are a lot of similarities between Jaden Daniels and Justin Fields. Nobody wanted Justin Fields. The league told us with their actions, he's not a starting quarterback. And the league is telling us with their actions, Jaden Daniels is not only a starting quarterback in this league, but is worthy of a top 3 pick in this year's draft that is loaded with quarterbacks and potential Hall of Fame talents at the wide receiver position. It's kind of weird.
I think my read on that is I feel like Justin Fields is like the floor for Jaden Daniels. And if that's the case, then he will probably fall out of favor with the rest of the league like Justin Fields did. I think the ceiling for Jaden Daniels is Lamar Jackson. And I think a lot of people in the NFL look back on whatever was it last year in the offseason where Lamar was tagged with the thing where he can negotiate with anybody. Mm-hmm. And everybody was like, we have Desmond Ridder. We don't need a quarterback. I think the league looks back. It was definitely collusion. But I think the Falcons look back on that as a mistake. I think the reason that he's viewed as the number 2 overall pick is because the ceiling is Lamar Jackson. Well, I think the floor is Justin Fields or worse. And then if that's the case, he'll be dealt for a 6th-round pick as well.
And that begs the question, the comparison there, how much upside could he have? Does he compare somewhat favorably with Lamar Jackson, or are more organizations and scouts souring a bit on the Drake May conversation?
By the way, somebody on the text line said, you can't forget that Justin Fields said no to some of the trades before he was traded. No, he didn't. He doesn't have a no-trade clause. He can't say no. That's not an option for him. It's absolutely not the case. All right, from the 636 guys, yesterday morning they did a segment on the top 5 teams who have not won a title that are the closest to winning one right now. who would be your thoughts on the top 5? This is something I'd have to look through a little bit more to be able to give you a better answer than what I am able to give right now. But just going through some of these, like in the NFL, the Falcons have not won a title. They've got a reasonable shot to be able to get there this year. I wouldn't say they're one of the favorites, but they're a good team. They're in a conference without a whole lot of like super teams. I could see it. The Bills aren't that far away. The Bengals aren't that far away. The Lions aren't that far away. There's some teams in the NFL that you could see getting there. In the NHL, Florida, I think could do it this year. Like they're my pick right now to win the title. So they would probably be, in my opinion, the closest to doing something like this. And in Major League Baseball, if you were looking at the teams that have not done it previously that could, Seattle has the rotation to be able to do it this year. I don't know that they have the roster, though. Those would be a few
Tampa,
of the teams
maybe.
that would get up there. Yeah.
Tampa's not won a World Series, so they might be there, but everybody that hasn't won a World Series in baseball is kind of thin. That's not been like Milwaukee's had their run. They're now going to be a team that's probably 4th in the Central. San Diego, like I like their pitching, but like their offense got a lot left to be desired once you get past their big 3. So it's probably the NFL teams and probably the Panthers that you pointed out would probably fill out my top 5.
All right, let's get out of here on this, guys. Given a healthy rotation with Gibson, Lynn, and Matz, do you think that if they have struggles in the regular season like they do in the spring training, how long will their leash be? So to sum this question up, Gibson, Lynn, Matz, how long is their leash in the regular season? And how would you rank them in terms of if they struggle, blank gets removed from the rotation first? I would say Matz would be my first to be removed.
Matz would be first because you could move him to the bullpen. Gibson to me would be 2. And if Gibson struggles in the rotation, I'm not sure Gibson's a Cardinal because he wouldn't play in the bullpen. He doesn't have swing and miss stuff like Matz and Lynn do. I think Lynn probably is the one that has a little bit more leeway, but I think they're going to be quick to pull the trigger on all 3 of those guys. I think all 3 have probably a month is what I would give them to show that there are signs of, whether you want to call it improvement, whatever you want to call it, signs of like you're not just a terrible starting pitcher for us.
And for what it's worth, Lynn has far and away been the most impressive in spring training, too. He has the longest leash. Gibson, we understand, has been up and down. The thing that is helpful about Matz is that last season in 2023, you recognized that he was effective in limited bullpen duty. So if you have to go down that avenue, hello, Zach Thompson.
Yeah. Lynn was bad yesterday, though. They were really bad. Like,
T-Bone, have you had an update at all on the Cardinals lineup? Did one get sent to you right now?
I have not seen one.
Okay. Somebody on our text line said that Victor Scott is starting today in center field.
I do have one. Victor Scott is in center field, and Carlson is in right field. And Burleson, big old Burley, he's in left.
Now I find it interesting. Now I find it very interesting. You didn't have to do that. 2 days in a row.
I'm telling
Carlson
you, man.
in one of the corners with Scott in center. That's meaningful. That matters.
You, man, he is making this opening day roster.
Color us intrigued.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Coming up next, Cardinals are really trying to find out what it looks like with Victor Scott in center field. Are you buying it? We'll talk about it next here on 101 ESPN.
March Mayhem is here. The madness of March tips off this week with first and second round action on 101 ESPN. From Cinderella stories to bracket busters, hear all the madness on 101 ESPN.
Courtesy of Saliga Heating and Cooling, your independent American Standard heating and air conditioning dealer.
See the entire March Mayhem schedule now at 101ESPN.com. WXOS, WXOS HD1 East St. Louis. 101 ESPN is driven by Auto Centers Nissan, home of the lifetime warranty and 30-day return. Giving you the picture, the real big St. Louis sports picture. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
The Cardinals have me officially intrigued based on what they've done with the lineup earlier today. Alongside Tanner Hendrickson and Bradford Bruns, I'm Brandon Kiley. You've got BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. Listen, I'm still skeptical. I don't know that I'm buying it, but the Cardinals have placed their lineup. They have put together their lineup for today. Victor Scott is once again in said lineup. He is playing in center field. Dylan Carlson is also in the lineup. And for the second consecutive day, they have Carlson in a corner with Victor Scott in center field. I'll do my old Brian Windhorst. Now, why would they do that? They would do it because they want to see what it looks like. Now, Burleson's in left field today, and I don't think there's any chance of Alec Burleson starting in left field on opening day. Zero chance, sir, of that happening.
After that comment we talked about at 11:15.
So, T-Bone, you have been the advocate for Victor Scott. You have been the believer that the Cardinals will take Victor Scott into opening day as their starting center fielder. What do you think of them putting him into the lineup in center field back-to-back days?
I think it says that they are leaning towards Victor Scott being their starting center fielder come opening day. I find it very interesting. Now, Carlson in right field, like if they had been doing that over time, like if it was Scott in center yesterday with Carlson in right, I would just chalk that up to, okay, they're getting Carlson some reps, and honestly, it's one of those where they want just Scott in the lineup, or it's one of those where it is, hey, we're plugging and playing. We knew we wanted X amount of starters here, and we got to plug and play all the other spots, like they did yesterday at short and in, I remember who the other one, when Walker traveled. The fact of the matter that Carlson was in left field yesterday was the sign to me that they are really exploring Carlson being their starting left fielder with Scott in center field. I think it's their best defensive alignment. And I know he's not in left field today. They've got Burley out there. I think they're just continuing to bounce him around in those corners. I think Victor Scott has stolen the job in center field from Dylan Carlson. I just believe he's been playing better, and he's played better defensively than Dylan Carlson because he's just an elite defender. He's got speed that is game-breaking for the St. Louis Cardinals. It caused havoc again yesterday. He bunted for a single, which I love. And I think right now he's better at the plate against right-handed pitching than Dylan Carlson is. I understand it's spring training and like some of the numbers may be going up against guys that are like double A's. But Carlson's numbers against right-handed pitching still are not very good, again, in this spring training. He's hit a little pop. He hit a double yesterday, had a home run. I just think Victor Scott is right now the better player than Dylan Carlson. I don't know if it's going to work in the long run. I don't know if he's going to take this job and run with it, A, for the season, B, for the first month. It could be a 2-week trial, and they go, holy crap, he's outmatched. I think he has the job right now in center field.
I still think I would lean towards Dylan Carlson. This is making me open my eyes. Like, the other thing is I do wonder how much of this is going to be an Ollie decision versus a Mo decision, because I think the classic Mo choice here, if I was to put on my Mo bow tie for you today, the Mo choice is the path of least resistance. It's the thing that frustrates me maybe more than just about anything with the Cardinals, is how often they choose the path of least resistance, where they're like, well, how could we possibly make a move on our 40-man roster when it is so stacked with options like Michael Ciani and Jared Young and Alfonso Rivas? Like, what are we going to do without these guys in our 40-man roster situation? It's nonsense, and we all know it's nonsense, but that's how they tend to operate in the past. If they are willing to change that, and I thought they were willing to change their offseason model as well going into the offseason, so again, I've got my guardrails up a little bit here. If they're willing to change that, and they're willing to say, okay, Ollie, you say you want to really commit to defense. What does that mean to you? And if he says that means I need Victor Scott in center field, I wouldn't blame him. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I said, this is about a week ago now, I thought there were two things that the Cardinals had as like the crippling factors for the 2023 version of the team. The rotation broke, and the defense in the outfield was abysmal. Well, their rotation is breaking again. It is crumbling at the seams, and if you look at what they have available to them this year, it looks a lot like, maybe even worse than, what they had a year ago until Sonny Gray gets back. If you look at the outfield defense, if you've got Dylan Carlson in center and Brendan Donovan in left and Jordan Walker in right, it looks a lot like it did last year when things were not going well. Victor Scott changes that calculus, man. He is the one piece that can really change the way fundamentally that you look at the outfield. He can also change the way that you run on the bases. And so I think it makes a lot of sense for them to go about it this way. I just don't know if I'm willing to believe that they're actually going to do it.
And I would add this too, and we brought this up about Walker last year. There's no pressure on him to perform offensively. You brought up when we were talking about this at 11:15, they're telling Mason Wynn all the right things. They're saying all the right things. Hey, just go be great defensively. If you struggle offensively, we're going to buy some time with your offense. Almost take the Yadier Molina approach, which was, hey, man, anything you get from Yadier in the first portion of his career was great. That was a bonus. But you really want him to be great defensively. And then he kind of adjusted and learned how to become a legitimate hitter at the plate for the St. Louis Cardinals. That's kind of the approach they're kind of saying for Mason Wynn so far. I would do the exact same approach with Victor Scott. You know what? Maybe he's not going to be great offensively. Maybe he's going to look a little bit overmatched. But I just believe that when you want to be elite defensively at any spot, you want to be elite up the middle. You want to be elite defensively at catcher. Yeah, you're underperforming there. But you're elite at shortstop with Mason Wynn, and if you're elite in center field for Victor Scott, he can cut back on any of the, if you even wanted to go with Burleson in left, which I don't think they're going to do. I think it's going to be Donovan or Carlson in left, and you've got Walker on right. If he doesn't take the steps forward defensively, well, you know what? He doesn't have to worry about that gap anymore. Those gaps are now covered by Victor Scott with his speed, and he is a elite defender. He is going to be a guy that can take away a bunch of extra base hits, and I'll never forget, we've told this story before. We were in Ollie's office talking with him before game last year, and he held up a stack of papers and said, see this right here? When the ball is in the air, we stink when the ball is in the air. And they can cut part of that away by having Victor Scott in center field. So if they are going with the defensive mindset, and Arenado said this today, I think it was Lynn Worthy, credit to him for having the quotes of hey, we've got to get back to playing good defense in center field. You know who he mentioned? We were good defensively when we had Harrison Bader in center field. You know who's closer to Harrison Bader defensively in center field right now is Victor Scott compared to Dylan Carlson. So I think they are leaning towards Victor Scott because of the defense.
And we know Nolan has some influence over this roster.
Yes.
And it's because of that dynamic quality and the athleticism. Right now, batting-wise, Tanner, let me throw this at you. Does this give you any additional confidence in Scott's ability to maybe produce from the plate when you consider that of the first 7 pitchers the Cardinals will face in all likelihood, LA and San Diego, there's just one, and it's a maybe with a James Paxton who's actually throwing from the left side. You're going to get a steady diet of righties.
Yeah, I wouldn't look at that personally, but it is a good point. I think when you look at for Victor Scott, he's going to start against right-handed pitching.
It could change things, though, in how you're looking at Dylan Carlson. Your expectation for Dylan Carlson against those right-handed pitchers. So essentially what we're talking about is what's the replacement value offensively, right? Well, if I'm expecting nothing from Dylan Carlson offensively because there's righties on the mound, it has less to do with Victor Scott and more to do with who he's replacing. I'm expecting nothing from him because he's still been bad against them even in spring training this year. Well, then I might as well go with the dude that produces all of this crazy speed and incredible defense in center field that I'm also expecting nothing from offensively.
Yeah, that's a good point. It could be a Carlson thing. I think when you look at this lineup, I'll be fascinated. I think this is now becoming I truly believe that Scott's making this team. I think they've decided that. Now, you still may want to see the final week of spring training. I think what they need to decide here in the final week is Victor Scott the starting center fielder? It is, who's the starting left fielder? I think it comes down to, is it going to be Carlson or is it going to be Donovan? Because right now, the quote that we read from Ollie about trying to balance defense and offense, I think right now their best balance is Donovan's in left field, and they've got Burleson as the DH. Against right-handers, that makes the most sense to me because you have Donovan and Gorman in the lineup. Burley's a better hitter than Dylan Carlson, for example. So I feel better about that lineup. And again, Victor Scott, I'm not worried about the offense, even though they're going to face some legitimately good pitching in the first week against the Dodgers and the Padres. I think anything he adds is a bonus, same as I'm viewing Mason Wynn. I'm not expecting Mason Wynn to hit in these first weeks in the season because of how good the pitching is. I just want him to be great defensively. If he's great defensively, that's a win for the St. Louis Cardinals.
I think his bunting ability really matters, too. I know that's so weird to say in the year 2024, but
do it.
Man, think about who you have. Your 7-hole hitter going into opening day is probably going to be Jordan Walker. Yeah, if I've got my 8-9 guys coming up to the plate and it's Mason Wynn and Victor Scott, I'd probably put Victor Scott batting 8th, honestly, because of his ability to bunt and just move those runners over. Go ahead. Let's see what it looks like.
That's funny because, it's a good. Sorry, Cardinal Nation. It's a good lineup. If we're talking 8-9, I'd go Scott 9 because if he gets on base, imagine the havoc for Goldie, Gorman, Arenado.
That potentially still exists for you with Mason. I think you could also argue, I'm giving Mason Wynn his best opportunity to be able to hit because if I have Victor Scott getting on in front of him, I don't think Donovan or Goldie or Arenado or Gorman, I don't think those guys need the added help. Having him on the base whenever Mason Wynn comes up to the plate, that matters. Yeah. Having him, who is a really good bunter, it's a skill of his, going up to the plate against all of these right-handed pitchers that Bradford brought up as an option to just either lay down a sac bunt or a bunt for a potential hit as well. I think that's also helpful when you've got Jordan Walker on first base, who does have a little bit of speed to be able to have a good jump there as well. Baseball-wise, just nerdy, you actually dive into not the numbers, setting all of that aside, just the scouting of it all. It makes sense in your lineup to have that left-handed bat batting 8th for you in your lineup going into opening day, and given what you mentioned earlier, Bradford, with the big outfields that they're going to be playing in, going up against teams that have really good pitching, it might have to be lower-scoring games early on in the season. He makes a lot of sense to be able to manufacture runs at the bottom of your lineup. It's not hard for me to convince myself why you should take Victor Scott into opening day on this roster. I think Ollie Marmol has convinced himself that the right move is to take Victor Scott with the team into LA. It's about convincing the front office, and that's where things get really interesting. And by the way, I don't think any of this has to do with any of the service time manipulation. I see that get brought up a lot on the text line. I think that has nothing to do with their decision here. Nothing. I don't think they're even factoring that in. The Cardinals don't do that very often, typically, with the service time stuff. If they wanted to do that, the guy you would have done it with was Jordan Walker a year ago. I think what's happening here is a true decision on what's best for Victor Scott long term. Is it better for him to start in AAA? Or do we need him so badly in the big leagues right now that we're willing to set that development aside for the 2 or 3 weeks where we need him to start off the season?
And the thing that has frustrated me this offseason is they've said all the right things of we need to show urgency in the first month. First month's important. But when I look at what the front office has done, most of that's been said publicly by Mo and by Ollie. I think they understand the urgency. But the way the front office has operated has been providing outs. Providing outs with the way they constructed the pitching staff, where Gibson and Lynn were on one-year deals, where they had opt-outs. The reason I bring that up is I hope it's not we really got to focus on the long term with Victor Scott. Man, if you're saying that April is a urgent month for the St. Louis Cardinals, and if this season goes south, that it could be entering a retool, well, who's the guy that helps you prevent that in center field? It's Victor Scott.
Can I give you one other, I guess it's almost a tinfoil theory?
Okay, I'm listening.
What if they want to see Jordan Walker at DH early on in the season? Scott, Carlson, Donovan in the outfields with Walker at DH. It's your best outfield.
Yeah, you want to talk about hurting long-term development in the outfield, I would say.
I hear you.
If they're going to do that, then you know who your first baseman is in 2025? It should be Jordan Walker.
Probably. They haven't signed Goldie long-term.
Fair.
If they are truly prioritizing, not just saying we care about it, but prioritizing defense, that is, your decision point there is actually Carlson versus Burleson. Because Burleson would be the guy that ends up getting the odd man out here. He no longer is your DH on those days. He would have to sit on the bench. He's your first bat off of the bench. He probably replaces Carlson late in the game against a right-handed reliever. Do you think that is something that they could consider going into opening day? Ooh. It'd be bold.
Yeah,
You're objectively better defensively in that scenario.
I agree. I don't think they'll do it that early. I think they'll see. I think they'll see if Walker can play right field for the first month of the season.
I agree, and I think they probably should.
Yeah, agreed. From there will become a decision point. They've said that he's put in all the work. They've said all the right things publicly.
Exactly.
About Walker working out in right field so far.
Yeah, but I've watched the games.
Yeah, it's windy down there. Okay, it's not windy here. So I hope they stick with him in right field. I think it's an interesting tinfoil because you're 100% right. They are better defensively with that alignment that you said.
I found it interesting that Carlson's in right today.
Yeah.
I think you got to get him opportunities there because there's going to be days off for Walker. We saw this last year. They'll get him a DH day once a week.
Is
they'll
Walker
definitely
in the
get him an
lineup?
opportunity. I have not seen.
He's not in the lineup. Okay, I was like, oh man, this is really interesting. If Walker's actually a DH today, he's not in the lineup.
In the very early days of April, that would be a viable, if not extremely enticing arrangement. That's why we're saying the early days of April, because if you run with that experiment, if you don't have a great degree of success either, I would maybe contend that not only if you're talking about the outfield, Tanner, but maybe a bit of jeopardization there too of the long-term development at catcher, because do we not expect Ivan Herrera to also get a fair number of games and reps really this season? Really?
I mean, once a series, same as any other season.
I just think by potentially putting that much more of an onus on Contreras, you could create a different slew of issues defensively than if
we saw last year. He's fine. He's fine. I think you're fine with Contreras behind the plate two games out of every 3 game series.
Yeah, Jack won't be upset this year.
Yeah. I think you're fine. You've got veteran pitchers. I think you'll be fine there. The DH spot can absolutely get clogged because we know how they're going to operate. Nolan's going to get a day off a week. Goldie's going to get a day off a week. You're going to have one game where it's Contreras. You're going to want to have a day probably coming off of the injury where you get Donovan an opportunity there. You're probably going to get an opportunity for Gorman there as well, given the back stuff where they want to keep him healthy throughout the season. So I don't think this can be something where they do it every day with Jordan Walker at DH. Probably 2-3 days a week, I would guess. But it's something worth considering. It's something that was brought to my attention by Jeff Jones over on Twitter, where he said, hey, it's pretty interesting that they've got Scott in center and Carlson in right as well to see if that could potentially work for him. It's definitely an interesting scenario. All right, coming up next, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. You give us 2 scenarios. We'll tell you which one's more likely. More likely to happen is next year on 101 ESPN.
It's time for another moment in Blues history.
On this day back in 1984, the Blues would put 9 up on the Winnipeg Jets. A 4-goal outburst in the first period by Brian Sutter, Joe Mullen, Greg Paslowski, and Guy Chenard to give the Blues a 4-0 lead. Winnipeg would fight back a little in the second period, but the Blues would score the final goal of the second and then the final 2 goals of the game in the third. Jorgen Pedersen and Doug Gilmour scoring those. Point leaders in the game for the Blues, Joe Mullen with 5 points, Bernie Federko with 4, and they had 6 players tied with 2 points.
This date in Blues history was powered by Classic Air Care, making people comfortable since 1926. For all your HVAC needs, ClassicAirCare.com.
Hey, it's BK for our friends over at Circa Sports in Illinois. You've already been out potentially to the Circa Sportsbook. I went out there last year for my best friend's bachelor party. We went to the Circa Sportsbook, went up to the swim-up bar. It was a fantastic time. It was the largest sportsbook in Las Vegas, and now it is available to each and every one of you at your fingertips in the state of Illinois. All you have to do, download the Circa Sports app today. Circa Sports Illinois is the place where you go. If you got an iPhone, you can go over there to the Apple Store. If you got anything else, go to your App Store. You'll be able to find the Circa Sports in Illinois app. They're going to have the best possible options available for you over there. They've got the tight money line splits. And if you're a big-time bettor and you're trying to avoid the limits that you've been placed from other places that are out there, it's not happening to you. Over at Circa Sports, they actually encourage you to download all of the different apps, Check out all of their menus. They believe that you will find Circa has the best odds available, and when you win over there, they're not going to limit you. So be sure to download it today, right ahead of the tournament that begins tomorrow. I've got Michigan State and Duquesne tomorrow. You can place your bets over there as well. It's the Circa Sports app in Illinois, or if you or someone you know have a problem with gambling, call 1-800-GAMBLER or text ILGAMB to 833-234.
We're right back to more of it. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN. What's more likely to happen? They'll figure it out. BK and Ferrario's most likely to happen.
314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for more likely to happen. You give us two scenarios. We'll tell you which one is more likely. Let's start out with this, T-Bone. More likely to be in the Cardinals outfield on July 1st. Victor Scott or Tommy Edman?
Oh, that's fun. I will say Victor Scott. I could totally see where Victor Scott ends up starting on opening day and not looking back and just takes the job from Tommy Edman. And Tommy Edman eventually ends up becoming your fourth outfielder, assuming his wrist ever actually starts healing. I could totally see where if Victor Scott's playing well, when Tommy Edman comes back in, let's say, a month, they say, there's no need to send Victor Scott down. He can learn here at the big league level. He's proven that he can play at the big league level, and he is elite at two different things. His speed's elite and his defense is elite. So I would say more likely it's Victor Scott.
July the 1st, right? Okay, let's go with your premise then, Tanner, that you indeed have Victor Scott running with the job and not looking back. Tommy Edman could conceivably then slide in as your fourth outfielder, or even don't discount the possibility, yes, Brandon Crawford is on the roster, but it's not out of the realm of possibility that he could find himself at shortstop on occasion too. There is so much versatility to be had, so let's go with Scott in that outfield.
Still going to stick with Tommy Edman because I think this team will value having one veteran in center field for the outfield, and I think they believe he can be a legitimate Gold Glover out there. But there is a path for Victor Scott to do in center what Mason Wynn did at the end of last year, which is, hey, this is his job. It's his job for not just right now, but for the foreseeable future. And in that scenario, you likely have your second baseman of the future locked up, your shortstop of the future locked up. They believe, to your point in the last segment, Bradford, their catcher of the future with Ivan Herrera locked up long-term. Jordan Walker either as the right fielder or first baseman of your future locked up long-term in center field. Like, you're starting to put together your core position player group that you can build around, and this allows you to spend a little more lavishly, depending on what happens with Goldie, in the starting rotation heading into next year. So there's an opportunity there, but I'm still going with Tommy Edman as the guy.
Guys, more likely to happen. The St. Louis Blues sign or trade for a second-line center this offseason, or they sign or trade for a top-line winger?
I think a center. I think what they're showing you with their actions right now is that they don't believe long-term that Braden Shin can stay healthy as a center. I think that's why he's on the wing right now. This is pure speculation by me, but I don't think he would be on a wing if he was 100% healthy. And over the last couple of seasons, we've seen this. It's been repeatedly. He gets dinged up. I don't blame him. He's getting a little older in age, and he's
plays a physical brand of hockey.
Absolutely. It makes a lot of sense, and at center, you have to deal with a little bit more of that brunt. So I think they're going to get a second-line center this offseason to allow Buchnevich, if they keep him, to be on the wing. And then you're going to have wings of Shin, Neighbors, Kyrou, Buch. That's your top 6 wingers. You probably have Saad and either Bolduc or Snuggerud as your other winger, and that's the way you go into next season. So I think they end up signing a we're trading for a top 6 center.
Yeah, BK, I totally concur with you for that exact same reason, insofar as you know that even if you're retaining Buchnevich, if you extend him, if you are able to agree to that sort of arrangement, he's not going to be the center for you. That is not the most enviable position for him. Get out there and grab another second-line center to slide behind Robert Thomas. That's the way to go.
Yeah, that's where I am as well. And it's become more obvious at this point for me in the season because of what we've seen. Like, we were discussing the lines earlier in the show. We were talking in the office. Like, Buch, you would prefer not to have Buch playing center, but you don't really have another second-line center. Like, you aren't going to move Hayes up. You aren't going to move Sonny to the second line. The only other second-line center you have is Shen, but he has played better at the wing, and I think your tinfoil kind of, I agree with. I wonder if he is hurt, and he is playing better at the wing, so I would just keep him there. So it's clear they need a second-line center. Worst-case scenario, you could run it back with Buch and Kyrou on that top line. Even though I don't think they're top-line wingers, we know this is a retool. Sure. So if you had to run it back one more year with those guys, you could.
Let's swing it back to baseball. We continue to talk about Victor Scott and the Redbirds. The MLB season at large actually began today between the Dodgers and Padres, but I'm looking at the AL East guys, which is an absolute mess below Baltimore and Tampa Bay. 2 teams that didn't make the postseason last year, lofty expectations again in the Yankees as well as the Blue Jays. Just today, Aaron Judge supposed to be returning to the lineup. Garrett Cole, though, to miss at least 3 to 4 weeks in Toronto. Blue Jays have issues as far as Manoah, Gossman, other members of the rotation. More likely to happen, the Yankees or the Blue Jays with reinforcements qualify for this year's playoffs.
Blue Jays easily, not even a question.
Not even a question?
Not even a question.
Wow.
The Blue Jays are a better baseball team than the Yankees. The Yankees and Red Sox are an embarrassment to their fan bases with the way that they've approached this offseason. I cannot believe that the Yankees did not sign Blake Snell and have not signed Jordan Montgomery. I saw a video yesterday from Red Sox fans outside of Fenway Park. They did this special on, I think it was Nesson up in Boston, and they just asked people walking around in the Fenway area, how many Red Sox can you name on this year's team?
Oh, gosh.
And there were like a dozen people that one after the other were like, yeah, I got nobody.
Devers and...
They said Devers. There were a couple of them that said Devers, and they said, can you name any others? And they're like, no, I got nobody else on this year's team. And it's totally understandable. Like, the Red Sox are a faceless and nameless organization right now, and it's embarrassing. Like, that organization should be better than this. And the same thing is true of the Yankees. They went through a season similar to the Cardinals, and their only real reinforcement that they added was Juan Soto. That's a big one, don't get me wrong, but their pitching was the problem last year, and now you don't have Garrett Cole.
And in Boston, Devers himself called out the front office when he arrived at spring training. The fact that you're still going to be relying on the 108-year-old Kenley Jansen as a fixture at the back end of your bullpen, that's one subject. But in looking at the Yankees...
Jansen, I want him in our bullpen.
Well, in looking at the Yankees...
Oh, never mind, I don't want him.
Do you not believe in the renaissance of Giancarlo Stanton? He's lost more weight than Burleson.
Yeah, I would agree with BK. It probably is the Blue Jays. I have some questions about Vlad Guerrero Jr. because his numbers continue to go on the downtrend. But their roster's just better constructed. The Yankees are old. You think the Cardinals' rotation is old? Go watch the Yankees play baseball. They are old as dirt. So I would agree with you. I think it's probably more likely the Blue Jays get in the playoffs.
All right, let's get into more likely to happen from the text line. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. More likely, Army trades or buys out a defenseman's contract. He doesn't buy people out, so I'm going trade.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. He talked a big game at the press conference when they fired Berube. I almost snickered at the press conference because I have not seen him buy anybody out, so I would say it's more likely he trades a defenseman.
Remember the talk about putting somebody on waivers? That was fun. Really enjoyed that conversation last offseason.
Has to be a trade, right? Has to be a trade.
I couldn't help but when he said that in my mind, do the Ferrario, okay, tough guy. They're not going to buy out and they're not going to put somebody through waivers.
More likely to happen, the Cardinals trade Paul Goldschmidt at the deadline or extend him in the offseason.
Trade him at the deadline. I don't think this team's very good. Like yesterday when we were talking for our 20 most important Cardinals, and he said, when I do my list, I was doing with the ceiling of a World Series. I was like, damn, my ceiling was like 85 wins. I don't think they're very good. And I could see where this rotation doesn't work out, where Gibson's spring training is actually Kyle Gibson. Lynn is still giving up home run balls. Steven Matz is not very good. Sonny Gray is, right now, he's dealing with a hamstring issue, but I expect him to be good. And maybe Michaelis doesn't bounce back, though. He's looked good in spring training. I just don't think the rotation's going to hold up. And if that's the case, they're going to rely on this offense to score 6-7 runs a game to win. And I can't see that happening, so I would say it's more likely they trade Goldschmidt at the deadline.
Yeah, Paul Goldschmidt does not get dealt. If he walks at season's end, then he walks. He's not getting moved. Not in season.
I think there's a scenario. I absolutely think there's a scenario, but it would require them being dead in the playoff race. I don't think that's going to happen. I think this team is good enough to be able to be in the race at the deadline, so I think it's more likely that he gets extended. We also just know how this team operates, and if he shows any sort of a resurgence, hell, even if he has a similar season to last year, I think there's a decent chance that he ends up back here in 2025. All right, coming up next, the conversation surrounding Jordan Kyrou is driving me bonkers, honestly. I understand both perspectives. He is super talented, but also incredibly frustrating to watch right now. Can we just have an honest conversation about the guy? We'll try to do that next year on 101 ESPN.
The bracket is out. Show off your tourney knowledge and play in this year's Bracket Madness Pick'em Challenge. It's free to enter, and this year's top scorer will take home a $250 Amazon gift card and a 101 prize pack. Must be 21 plus and a resident of Missouri or Illinois. See the contest rules and get signed up to play in Bracket Madness now at 101ESPN.com.
Brought to you by Bud Light. Easy to drink, easy to enjoy. And by Twin Peaks. Eats, drinks, scenic views.
Attention St. Louis sports enthusiasts. On March 25th, the Blues
can now watch 101 ESPN live on our Air Alliance Team Studio Cams. Catch every show live on our YouTube channel or at 101ESPN.com. 101 ESPN Studio Cams.
Presented by the Air Alliance Team Heating and Cooling. Getting the job done quickly, correctly, 100% of the time.
101 ESPN Sports Center.
MLB season starts overseas. I'm Bradford Bruns, and this SportsCenter update is brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling. Shohei Ohtani and the Dodgers have knocked off the Padres 5-2 to begin baseball's 2024 campaign/Soul Series. LA's star offseason edition, capping a 4-run eighth-inning rally with an RBI single, and Evan Phillips tossed a perfect ninth for the save. Later today, the Cardinals battle Washington spring training style as Steven Matz toes the rubber. Hockey, the Blues succumb to Colorado 4-3 downtown. Drew Bannister's club visits Ottawa tomorrow. It's a 6 o'clock puck drop on 101 ESPN. St. Louis trails Minnesota by 1 point in the Central race, but the Wild could widen that gap tonight depending upon what happens against Los Angeles. The SportsCenter update was brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling, an independent American Standard heating and air conditioning dealer.
This is exactly where you want to be, listening to us. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
All right, nobody is willing to have an honest conversation with Jordan Kyrou, or at least that's the way that it feels. Because the two sides are so entrenched in how they feel about their favorite player or their least favorite player that it just becomes shouting at each other and saying, well, this stat matters and that stat doesn't, and look at this and don't look at that. And it's growing frustrating to me. Alongside Tanner Hendrickson and Bradford Bruns, I'm Brandon Kiley. You've got BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. So let's try to have a semi-nuanced conversation about one of the three most talented players on the Blues who sometimes doesn't play up to that talent, shall we? So Jordan Kyrou in his last 15 games has 2 goals and 5 assists. In that time, he's a -10 on the ice. If you look at even strength, he has 1 goal in his last 15 games. Now, this happens. I've tried to say this point to Alex a lot. It's something that we get into some conversations about and sometimes some disagreements about. Goal scorers go through slumps. And sometimes that means that 15-game stretch where they don't score at all, and then a 15-game stretch where in those 15 games they score 10 goals. That doesn't mean that the 10-goal pace is real and the 1-goal pace wasn't, or so on. That's just how it works. We see this all the time. Baseball players, there are guys that get hot and then get really cold.
Gorman.
There are other guys that are just steady Eddie throughout the season. For the most part, Goldie. That's the way that he operates. But they end up getting to a similar spot a lot of the time. So, the reason why I bring that up with Kyrou is because I have been somebody that, for the most part, has defended him. I think the critics, to me, are a little too loud with Jordan Kyrou. I think they overlook some of the good that comes along with him. He is a better playmaker, a better creator than I think a lot of people give him credit for. Not goal-scoring, creator. I think, in general, his defensive game has taken a step forward this year. It's not great, but I think it's fine. It's passable for the most part. I think if you have Jordan Kyrou as a second-line winger, you have the potential to be a very good hockey team. I also think in the last 15 to 20 games, we have seen his offense slip. And for a player like Kyrou, much like what you mentioned for Gorman, when the offense isn't there, you start to spotlight all of the negatives because they show up more. Whereas with a guy like Jake Neighbors, when he doesn't have the offense going, you still feel his presence. He's still physical. He's still making plays in front of the net. It's easier for him to show up even when he's not scoring goals because of his style of play. Kyrou's style does not lend itself to that. You're not going to notice him when he's not scoring goals or when he's not creating for others. So right now, he's not creating very well, in my opinion, for others. I think there have been a couple of really bad turnovers. Last night, that was a terrible penalty that you cannot take in that spot, and it was on him. Nobody else. That is on him. So Jordan Kyrou has once again become this lightning rod of discussion. I don't think that's going to end. This is the style of player that it typically happens to, whether it's here in St. Louis or elsewhere. It was the same thing with William Nylander for years up in Toronto. They finally have come to appreciate him. But T-Bone, where are you at right now on Jordan Kyrou? What he means to this team, what this next month or so means for his future. Where are you at on Jordan Kyrou?
So I do think that this year has been disappointing in terms of his offense, and I don't think that's any secret to anybody. Defensively, I agree with what you said. I do think he has taken strides. And look, the whole goal for Kyrou, we said this coming into the season, was instead of being awful offensively, can he just be bad defensively? And honestly, I think he's done that. Now, you can't take the penalty he took last night, as you said. I think the thing with Jordan Kyrou is he reminds me a lot of, I'll say Tarasenko, but I'll also go back to like what you said about like the Gorman comp, for example, of like when the offense is not going, you notice it a lot more. I think for a goal scorer in hockey, when you talk about like a Jordan Kyrou, a Vladimir Tarasenko, you really start to spotlight them when the team around them doesn't have the offense to support them. And what I mean by that is, think back to like the Blues during that Cup run and a little bit after that when they still had Vladdy on this team. Vladdy played a lot of the similar style of hockey, being an offensive-minded guy, wasn't very good defensively. I did feel like at times he was better defensively, just in spurts, but forget that. That's not here nor there. But the reason you don't notice the Vladimir Tarasenko cold spells as much is because that team around him was really good. You had four lines that were solid. You know, you had a top line that Ryan O'Reilly was leading with David Perron. You had a really good third line, and Bozak centering a really good fourth line. But when the roster starts to deplete a little bit of talent, as has happened with the St. Louis Blues, and you have a Jordan Kyrou as a goal scorer, when the team's bad, as they are offensively at 5-on-5, who's the guy that you're going to hone in on and say, he's got to be the guy? It's Jordan Kyrou. Because I think he's the best natural goal scorer on the roster. So he's the guy that you highlight, and when he plays poorly, because there is no other lines to look at and say, oh, well, hey, the third line's been playing really well, the top line's doing well, the second line or the fourth line, everybody just goes right to Jordan Kyrou and says, that's got to be the goal scorer. And in all reality, yeah, this is what a goal scorer is going to do. He's going to float in and out of games. There's going to be a 15-game stretch where you're like, man, you really need more out of Jordan Kyrou. There's also going to be a 15-game stretch where you go, hot damn, he's been playing really well. It's just more noticeable, in my opinion, this year because of the fact that the roster around him is just not very good. There is no depth of scoring for the St. Louis Blues, so I think it hones in more on Jordan Kyrou. Like for Gorman, for example, when he has a long stretch, like last year, I think it was June, he was awful. I think he hit below 200. You don't notice it as much if the offense around him is playing well. It's kind of, oh, hey, Gorman's been kind of struggling. I see the numbers. But if the offense as a whole is playing poorly, there's one guy that you're going to pick out, and you're going to pick out Gorman. Why? Because he strikes out and doesn't put the ball in play. That's how I view Jordan Kyrou as being viewed here in St. Louis. Now, would I move on from him in the offseason? I would be open to it because I think he's overpaid right now at $8.25 million, especially that he is a second-line winger. I wouldn't pay that to a second-line winger. But I think that you are getting exactly what the expectation should have been for Kyrou, and I think the contract adds into what I'm talking about as well for the way that people view him and why they latch on to him.
I think all of that's fair for the most part. So we got a text from the 314. BK, not that you had much credibility when it came to hockey, fair, but comparing Kyrou to Nylander is a joke. Comparing the current version of Nylander to the current version of Kyrou, totally agree. It's a joke. Comparing the first four seasons, and I'm just talking about stylistically, right? Like, Nylander is a bigger player than Jordan Kyrou. He played center a decent amount early on in his career. It's not a one-for-one. But in terms of stylistically and the way that they were discussed within their respective markets, that's what I'm trying to get at here. William Nylander, in his first four full seasons, played in 285 games. That is roughly 80 more games than Kyrou has played over the last four seasons, which are his first four full seasons in the NHL. But let's bear with me here. In 285 games, William Nylander had 80 goals. First four full seasons of Jordan Kyrou's career, 208 games so far, 78 goals. If you're looking for points production, Jordan Kyrou in 208 games has 183 points. William Nylander in 285 games had 208 points. In a points per game, goals per game perspective, Jordan Kyrou has been more productive for the St. Louis Blues in his first four full seasons than William Nylander was in his first four full seasons for the Toronto Maple Leafs. That does not mean Jordan Kyrou is a better player. It does not mean that he will become a more productive player. It doesn't mean any of that. But the same frustrations that you have right now about Kyrou is what people in Toronto had about Nylander. It came together for him. It ended up working out in Toronto with him. That is not always the case, though, and this is why it's a tougher conversation, I think, than just to say, get rid of him, run his ass out of town. This is the latest cancer in the Blues locker room. Getting rid of him will make the team better. Not necessarily. Who's the goal scorer if you get rid of him? It's easy to say Jimmy Snuggerud. Think about how long it took, though, for Robert Thomas to become this version of Robert Thomas. Think about how long it took for Jordan Kyrou to even be this version of Jordan Kyrou. Think about how long it took for David Perron to become that, for Vladimir Tarasenko to become the fully formed version of himself. It takes a while, guys. Dalibor Dvorsky's putting up big-time numbers right now in juniors. You think he's just going to come in and immediately dominate the NHL? Because I saw Zach Bolduc's numbers last year down in juniors, and I see what he is this year in the NHL. He's a fun, interesting player. Right now, he is a borderline, and I mean borderline, top 9 forward in the NHL. On a contending team, like a real contender, he's not playing in the NHL right now. So it's hard to get to the place where you can just immediately replace Jordan Kyrou with somebody from the outside and improve upon him. The expectation, if you do go to the market to be able to find somebody, is probably getting something pretty similar to what you have from Brandon Saad. And guys, I've seen the texts. I've seen the tweets. I don't think you're all that thrilled right now with what you're getting from Brandon Saad over the last few seasons either. So it's not as easy as just replace the guy, you'll be better. I don't know. But I would also add this. The contract is a big part of the conversation. Jordan Kyrou is making more than $8 million. T-Bone, there are 50 players, there are this season, if you're just looking at the forwards, 45 forwards making at least $8 million this season. Among those 45 forwards, Jordan Kyrou is 36th in points per game. So he's in the bottom 10 in points per game this year among the guys that are making as much as him. If you look underneath the hood, though, it's kind of like if you got a guy like Paul Goldschmidt last year. His overall numbers, not that great. If you look under the hood a little bit, there's a lot of reasons for optimism. The same is true for Jordan Kyrou. I'm not going to bore you with the numbers, but a lot of the expected numbers, they're pretty good for him still this year. They look like a guy that you should be betting on for 2024. If I was a GM of another team, I would be targeting him and saying, hey, got some bad luck this year, should have been a lot better than what it was. So that's where I'm at with him. It hasn't been good enough. It's got to be better. And if the Blues are going to make the playoffs this year, it starts with Kyrou. Yeah. He has to up his game. And also, I think he gets a little bit of undue criticism because he is the type of player that is easy to criticize. Because when he does not perform well, it's obvious. All of us can see it from the outside looking in. And also, frankly, his body language ain't all that great when he's not playing well. So you combine all of that, some of the stuff that his teammates have said, he's not clearly the easiest guy to gel with. All of that leads to some criticism, understandably so. But I wanted to be able to spend some time on both the good and the bad that comes with Kyrou, because it's not as simple, I think, as some of the conversations that people try to have with him.
And to the point of not gelling with teammates, man, the teammates know you have to have a guy like Jordan Kyrou and his goal-scoring ability to win in the NHL. They know you've got to have that. It becomes a lot easier to kind of deal with when the team is playing better hockey and he is playing well. You know, Vladdy had a lot of the same issues. You know, a lot of guys did not. I mean, you heard David Backes actually say how they called him out at practice when David Backes was here when we talked to him 2 days ago. Well, Vladdy would have been frustrating when he didn't play well and the team didn't play well. But when the Blues are winning, you can kind of overlook a bit of those struggles. So that's why it's so tough with goal scorers, because you're right. A lot of it is what we talked about with the good and bad of Kyrou. I think it comes down to it becomes a lot more obvious when the team is playing poorly. When the Blues are not in a winning streak, like we haven't won they won the last 4 before last night's loss. You don't really talk about Jordan Kyrou a lot. You see it, but you don't talk about it a lot. Why? Because the Blues are winning. The other lines are rolling a little bit. But man, when they lose last night, and Kyrou's the guy that takes that penalty, man, he is the whooping boy for that day's loss.
Blues off tonight, back in action tomorrow against the Senators. By the way, if you missed it earlier today, they did make a lineup change. It looks like Zach Dean is going to be in the lineup tomorrow against the Senators. He will be replacing Oscar Sundqvist on the fourth line as their center for that line. So Zach Dean getting his first NHL action. They will also have Jake Neighbors up with Robert Thomas and Braden Shen again on the top line, according to the way that they skated this morning. The Junk Drawer coming up next here on 101 ESPN.
Give us your opinion on the Air Comfort Service heating, cooling, and insulation text line at 314-399-9646 on 101 ESPN.
Hey, it's BK for my friends over at Green Envy. As I'm walking through the neighborhood, I see all of the struggles that people are having with their lawn. It's tough, man. I live in St. Charles. The soil out there is not particularly conducive to growing that beautiful, luscious green grass that you're looking for. But Green Envy has helped me out. If you walk past my house right now, I have one of the best lawns in the neighborhood. That is no thanks to me and all thanks to Green Envy. They started it out in the fall. They were able to plant the seed. They aerated it for me. They'll come through in the spring. They put down that fertilizer to make sure everything is growing as they hope it does. They have me taken care of. They can take care of you as well. They're open 12 hours a day, Monday through Friday, and then they are also open Saturdays from 9 to 1 as well. They'll take all of your calls, answer any questions that you may have, whether it's your lawn that you want to get taken care of. They're helping me out with my bushes and my trees in my front yard as well, making sure that they're maintained the right way. Green Envy is there for you. They understand Missouri soil. They will understand your lawn. Give them a call today, 636-757-1600. That's 636-757-1600. Green Envy Lawn Care.
The only sports source in St. Louis that matters. WXOS, WXOS HD1 East St. Louis, 101 ESPN. They are St. Louis. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN. Let's open it up. The Junk Drawer with BK and Ferrario.
Brought to you by Fenton Bar and Grill. Best trashed wings in Missouri. Dine in, carry out, 7 days a week.
T-Bone, I got a text last night at 8:21 from my buddy who lives out in Las Vegas and said to me, BK, I've done it. I already hate myself for it, but I have placed a bet on Virginia to win straight up. My response, you should be ashamed of yourself for placing this bet. He said it's too good of a value. I had to do it. At 8:26, I get a response. What did I do to myself? Why did he send that text? Because the first possession of the game for Virginia was a shot clock violation. You can't make this stuff up, man. Later on in the game, Virginia went 52 minutes of real time. 52 minutes. We have now 55 minutes left in the show. So basically, for the end of the show, Virginia made exactly 0 field goals. 0. Did not make a shot from the field for 52 minutes in an NCAA tournament game. This is the team that the NCAA tournament committee gave to us in a first 4 matchup.
Bennett ball, baby.
Embarrassing. T-Bone, I understand that they won a national championship with this style of basketball. I would not employ Tony Bennett. I would not allow it. I would not allow it at my university because of how dreadful it is to watch.
It's like Iowa football.
There are certain teams that can have success, such as Iowa football, that I just, A, refuse to watch, and B, absolutely refuse to bet on. You could not pay me to bet on Virginia last night. You could not pay me to bet on anything other than the unders for Iowa football during the regular season. There is a specific style of play in certain sports that I just can't handle, man, and Virginia basketball is one of those.
Yeah, they are a tough watch, and frankly, it's embarrassing that the selection committee put them in the tournament. I know it was the first 4, and look, you can view that as a playing game if you want. That's the tournament. That was embarrassing that the selection committee put them there.
Another explanation as to why we should not expand the tournament, by the way.
Amen.
There is 0 reason to expand this. Can we go back to 64, please?
Please. Yes.
Can we please go back to 64? Nobody wants the 68. We don't need the play-in games, guys. We really don't. I didn't need Virginia last night. I don't need to watch any of these.
Weren't you entertained with Wagner and Howard?
No.
And that was a close game, though.
I also don't think that the first 4 teams should be the teams that automatically qualified. If you're going to do it, just exclusively make it the final 4 at-large teams.
Agreed.
The teams that win their conference tournament deserve to be a part of the tournament. Not the first 4 in Dayton. They deserve to go to a region where they're actually participating in the NCAA tournament. I think the NCAA has messed this thing up 17 different ways. The tournament at 64 was perfect. We all agreed. It's the first weekend of the tournament starts on Thursday. It goes through Sunday. You're battling to make it to the second weekend of the tournament. We all understand how it works. We don't have to operate with any math. It just is perfect. And they found a way to screw it up, and I can't wait for them to do the same thing for the men's side of the college football playoff. It's going to be great. It's going to be great.
How about that ACC?
Oh, that...
I'm a little worried about my North Carolina pick from the other day.
I would be too after watching Virginia last night.
That was the 3rd best team in the ACC this year.
Oh, boy.
Let
was
that
Virginia.
sink in for a moment. My God. And they were bad. They left off some... it was a bad decision by the selection committee, A, by watching the game last night. B, as they were starting to play poorly, you see the video when they got announced as a team that made the tournament. And I think there was someone in the background that went, oh, my God, I can't believe we made it. That's how you know it's a bad selection. And they left out teams and look, I'm not saying, St. John would have done anything, but St. John's was left out. Indiana State was left out. There were some solid teams that would have beat the crap out of Virginia, and they were left out of the tournament because the selection committee was too focused on Virginia's past.
And if nothing else, they would have been more fun.
Amen.
And really, isn't that what the NCAA tournament's supposed to be, is rewarding teams for having a lot of fun?
He's going to be reevaluating now. He has to reevaluate his style.
He's been operating this. He lost in the first round of the NCAA tournament.
I realize it.
Seed.
I was going to say, they were the ones that lost to 16.
So, yeah, I'm sure they'll be reevaluating the slow pace that they play with.
Come to Jesus moment.
Coming up next, we continue our countdown of the 20 most important Cardinals with a player whose upside might be untapped. And I still think it's going to be really hard for him to hit in the top 6. We'll talk about it next here on 101 ESPN.
101 ESPN has your chance to win a 4-pack of tickets to Monster Energy AMA Supercross, returning to the Dome at America Center on Saturday, March 30th. Watch the premier riders in the world, as well as the rising stars as they put it all on the line for the coveted title of Supercross champion. Experience the intense racing of the world's most demanding sport live at Monster Energy AMA Supercross. Get all of the info and get registered to win that free 4-pack of tickets now, either at 101ESPN.com or on your 101 mobile app. volatility on his client's assets. So
Giving you the picture, the real big St. Louis sports picture. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN. The 20 most important Cardinals for the 2024 season.
Number 8, Jordan Walker.
Swing and a drive. Oh, baby, look at that one go. Past Big Mac Lamb. Onto the concourse. Swing and a drive. Walker has launched one, and the Cardinals are back in front. Little pop. That's trouble. Walker on the run. Dive. Yeah, what a catch. What a catch by Walker.
I just really see that.
At number 8 on our countdown of the 20 most important Cardinals for the 2024 season, it is Jordan Walker. Guys, you can make a case for Jordan Walker as a top 5 player on this team. In fact, Alex Ferrario would. Alex, on his list of the 20 most important Cardinals, had Jordan Walker at number 4. T-Bone had him at number 9. I was right there with Tanner. I had him at number 10 on my list of the 20 most important Cardinals. And none of this is to speak of how good he could be this year. It's entirely possible Jordan Walker is the best hitter on the Cardinals in 2024. He had the best average on the team a year ago.
Yeah.
He could hit 30 home runs, 30 doubles, end up with an on-base percentage of like 360, play slightly below average defense in right field, and be considered to be the best player on the team. That is totally in play. And even with all of that, I still think because of the context of the way that this roster is constructed, he would not be considered, for me, a top 5 most important, most valuable, most indispensable player on the team. And that's because of the importance of a couple of his frontline starters, and because he is one of many right-handed, overall solid top to bottom hitters. You've got Goldie, you've got Arenado, you've got Contreras, and it's going to be really hard to find a scenario where Walker ends up jumping any of those 3 veterans in the order to bat higher than 5th this year in the order. So that's why I had him lower on my list. It does not speak to my excitement about watching Jordan Walker this year. It speaks to the roster construction for the Cardinals.
Yeah, that's why I had him low on my list as well. Is I think the ceiling for him is a guy that could hit like 30 home runs, have 30 doubles, be the first guy to do that since Albert Pujols. Like, the ceiling is just unbelievable for Jordan Walker, and I think his defense could get to average this year in right field. The problem, though, is what you said. It's just hard to envision how he's going to be hitting top 5 in this order. And for me to be putting him into the top 5 of my 20 most important Cardinals, you got to hit somewhere in the range between like 2 and 5. And I just have a tough time seeing where they end up doing that, because even if he is hitting the ball well, I think the highest he's going to get this year is 6th, because they love Goldie at the 2 spot. Arenado won't move out of cleanup. And Contreras, I think they like at 5, and they love a lefty sandwich between Goldie and Arenado. So it's hard to see a scenario in which you're going to have Walker hitting high in the order. I for a while did have him as high as Alex did, but then the more I sat there and talked about it, I was like, man, even if he reaches his ceiling, it's not that important for the Cardinals. If I basically copied and pasted what Jordan Walker did last year and just had him play in 140 games instead of 117, it wouldn't be the end of the world for the Cardinals. You know, he's hitting so low in the order, and I think that's a great thing for the St. Louis Cardinals, not putting a ton of pressure on him. The fact that he can hit 7th in the order and just say, hey, man, go out there and you do you. I think that's a great thing for St. Louis. It just shows the depth of their lineup, but it's the only reason he didn't crack higher on this list for me.
I think 1, 3, and 6 in your order every day will be your 3 lefties in some combination. I don't know who it's going to be. Like, at the beginning of the season, those 3 in some order will be Donovan, Gorman, and Burleson.
Yeah.
I think when he is healthy, you can replace Burleson with Nootbaar. And I think it'll depend on who the matchup is, where those guys end up hitting in those 3 slots, and depending on how they're performing. But I think those will be the 3 guys that hit 1, 3, and 6 for you. And I think 2, 4, and 5 are locked in as long as they're in the order of those days. And I think they're going to play just about every day. It's going to be Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado, and Wilson Contreras. And it's hard to argue with that, man.
Yeah.
Those guys have earned those spots in the order.
Right.
I could see at some point, if things do not get back on track the way we all expect, maybe Walker and Goldie flip. That would be the one thing that I could see. I think long-term, Jordan Walker is probably your two-hole hitter for this team. But for this season, it's going to take a lot. We've seen it with guys in the past, in that 5-hole especially. Managers love leaning on their veterans in the middle of the order. And for this team, they have 3 veterans from the right side that have earned that have a long history of success at the major league level. In terms of the ceiling for Jordan Walker in 2024, T-Bone, I look at what Vlad Guerrero Jr. did in 2022. That's always been my comparison for what it looks like at the best case scenario for Jordan Walker here in St. Louis is, hey, can he be for you something similar to what Vlad Guerrero has been in his career so far for the Toronto Blue Jays? In 2022, Guerrero hit .275, got on base 34% of the time, finished with an OPS plus 33% above league average. He did what you said, 35 doubles, 32 home runs, drove in 97 that year. I think obviously we would all sign up for that. I think that is pretty close to the ceiling of what we could see this year for Jordan Walker. How do you feel about his ceiling heading into the season?
I'd agree with that. I think it could be somewhere in that range. I don't think he's going to have the RBI total there at 97 or any. I think he's probably in that 60 to 80 range just because he's hitting lower in the order. I don't know if he's going to have the opportunities to drive in a ton of runs and get to that 100 RBI threshold, but I can totally see where it's 30 home runs, 30 doubles for him and can have that slash line at 275, 339, 480. He should be a guy with the expectation of he's going to be an 800 OPS guy. And I mean that not just for probably this year, but for his career. His career should be 800 OPS guy, probably honestly an 850 plus OPS guy. That's how good I think he can be. I think that is probably the perfect idea for what his ceiling could be this season.
Worst case scenario for you?
Worst case scenario is, I don't know. To me, I don't think his bat's going to end up lagging behind. I think worst case scenario is kind of the tinfoil we were talking about earlier. He doesn't end up developing in the outfield. And now you have a below average right fielder, and they have to move him to DH. Now, if they do move him to DH, I would worry that might be what slows down his bat, because we've talked with Corey Dickerson when he signed with the St. Louis Cardinals. We've seen where a lot of teams don't like to go to young guys to play that DH spot because it's so hard to stay ready as a DH. So I guess if I was worried about his bat, which I'm not, worst case scenario, he cannot be a right fielder or he's below average in right field. They have to take him out of that spot and move him to DH.
That's my one concern. That remains with Jordan Walker. I have zero concerns about the bat. I know that he hits the ball too often on the ground, but he hits it hard enough, and I think he's going to be able to make the transition as he continues to develop at the major league level. He's got to be a good hitter. Where's he fit on the field? I think it can be right field, but I was hoping for a little more improvement compared to what we've seen so far this year in the spring. We did get one question on the text line that I want to get to, but first,
it's time to fly down to Florida for a spring training report on 101 ESPN.
Presented by E&B Granite, Brooke, Jamie, Curbs, and Bernie Federko's choice for countertops and cabinets.
The Cardinals have put out their lineup for their game tonight against the Nationals. Victor Scott is leading off in center field. Dylan Carlson in right field. He will be batting second for the Cardinals in this game. By the way, Thomas Ajayci once again in the lineup for the Cardinals. He's playing third base for them today. That's a name worth remembering. I don't know when it's going to be. I would assume at some point midway through the year. But depending on injuries, Thomas Ajayci is going to factor into the lineup at some point this year. He's just hit too well. In spring training, he hit incredibly well down in AA last year. He was the MVP of that league a year ago. Ended up, I think, winning their batting title, if I'm not mistaken. Thomas Ajayci is a professional hitter, and he will hit at every level. I think he's going to continue to do so for the Cardinals. So keep that in mind as well. He's been one of the top at-bat leaders for the Cardinals in spring. There's a reason for that. They want to see what he can do against some of these guys. And to have him still as a part of this roster, I find it to be pretty meaningful, because a lot of the time around this point in the spring, you see some of those guys going down to the other side. But Victor Scott batting leadoff, Dylan Carlson batting second, Scott in center, Carlson in right. That feels meaningful to me.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and especially because it's back-to-back days that they've had Scott in center and Carlson in a corner. Yesterday it was left for Carlson. Today it is right. I think the reason that, to your point on Ajayci, how he's still sticking around, Scott's sticking around, and not just sticking around, but he's been in the lineup consistently. I think they're leaning towards Victor Scott in center. I think they feel he's the best defensive center fielder on the roster right now. I don't know how they feel about his bat, but Carlson's not hitting against right-handed pitching. So maybe they feel like, okay, well, if Carlson's not going to hit against right-handed pitching, and Scott's not going to hit against right-handed pitching. What does each other bring to the game if they're not hitting? Well, Scott, if he does find a way on base, can steal bases and play elite defense.
If we were to redo our list today and we had the knowledge, we obviously don't have this, but if we were guaranteed Victor Scott's going to be your opening day center fielder, where would he be on your list of the 20 most important Cardinals, or our list? We had Carlson at number 20. We had Zach Thompson at 19, JoJo at 18. At 17, it was Gio, 16, Ivan Herrera. That feels about like the spot that I would put him.
Where was Edman?
Edman was at 14. 15 was Kyle Gibson, 14 Tommy Edman.
I'd probably put him there. Because I think it's the same role of I don't really care what he provides me offensively, but can he play elite level defense in center? And because he has that factor of being a guy that could be a guy that causes havoc on the base paths, I think he kind of fits into that spot. I would probably just replace Tommy Edman with Victor Scott, and honestly, I'd probably push Tommy Edman into Carlson's spot.
Makes a lot of sense. All right, coming up in about 15 minutes or so, we will break down the South Regional in this year's NCAA tournament. We'll give you our thoughts on the region that includes Houston, Kentucky, Marquette, and Duke as the top 4 seeds. We'll get our breakdown on that coming up here in just a little bit. But next, I said yesterday, the Blues have 1 mulligan in their next 4 games, and the best place to use it was last night. What does it mean for the next 3? We'll talk about it next year on 101 ESPN.
Blues hockey can be heard exclusively on 101 ESPN. Get the info you need before and after every Blues game with the First Community pre- and post-game show driven by Clement Ford. And catch every Blues home game from the First Community Terrace.
Bring out the Zamboni!
.101 ESPN Sports Center.
Cardinals clash with Nationals. I'm Bradford Bruns, and this Sports Center update is driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. This afternoon at 5:05, the Redbirds will do battle with Washington in spring training action. Steven Matz gets the assignment on the mound. Earlier today, another Major League bout overseas. The Dodgers defeat San Diego 5-2. Shohei Ohtani and Mookie Betts registered 2 hits apiece. Tyler Glasnow started for LA. Evan Phillips finished the job with a 1-2-3 ninth. Hockey, the Blues return to the ice tomorrow against Ottawa. You can hear Puck Drop at 6 on 101 ESPN. Yesterday, the Note dropped a 4-3 verdict to Colorado. The Sports Center update was driven by Johnny Londoff. Find new roads and shop 24/7 at Londoff.com and LondoffAutoplex.com. Are you kidding me?
We're right back to more of it. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
The Blues had one mulligan into them, and they used it last night against the Colorado Avalanche. 4-3 loss at home. A good effort, but ultimately a few different mistakes lead to the loss. A bad turnover by Booch, Kyrou's penalty. Not a great game, honestly, by Benner compared to what we've been expecting from him recently. And you go over 3 on the power play. That's not going to work out for you the way that this team operates. So you lose that game 4-3. Overall, though, I didn't come away feeling any worse about the team. In fact, I think I felt a little better about them coming out of that game than I did going into it. But T-Bone, they are up against it. They put themselves in a hole based on losses earlier this year, especially the losses against Columbus going into the break and the loss at home coming out of that big win against Edmonton when they lost against Nashville. You lose those 2 games, you put a lot of pressure on yourself down the stretch if you want to be able to make a playoff race. The next 3 games are must-win. You're playing against Ottawa tomorrow night. You got to win that one. Ottawa's a bad team, man. They've gone like a month without winning a game in regulation. They're terrible. They're a top 5 pick in the draft. They're in sell assets mode. Then the next 2 games are teams that you are directly competing with for a playoff spot. You got the 2 points, but gave up a point to Minnesota the last time that you played them. You got to win that one in regulation coming up later this week. And then Vegas at home. That's a must-win game next Monday night. That is the team that I think you have the best chance to be able to overtake in this mix. I think it's you, LA, Vegas for 1 spot. I don't think you're competing right now against Nashville. I think they're the best team of these 4 with the way that they're playing, comparatively speaking, down the stretch. T-Bone, you're going into a stretch that's important, and while you're doing so, Vegas' schedule is ramping up. They've got St. Louis, Nashville, Winnipeg, Minnesota, Vancouver, and then another one against Vancouver, Edmonton, Minnesota, Colorado. That's a rough slate right there for Vegas. LA has Minnesota, Tampa, Vancouver, Edmonton, Winnipeg. This is your opportunity. The next 10 days or so are when the Blues have to be able to take advantage. We're going to find out by April 1st if this team's a real threat to make the playoffs.
Yeah, I'm 100% agree with that. I think you're at a stretch now to where, though I would argue you don't need 10 points in the next 5, you probably need 9 out of 10. I mean, you got to find a way to get a point in every one of these games because you're right, Ottawa, that probably should be a win going on the road. Minnesota, I think you're the better team than Minnesota, even though they're right there with you. That's got to be a win. And then you're right, Vegas is the one that you can basically circle. Can you beat the Vegas Golden Knights? Because that's a 4-point swing right there. And that's the one that is must win. And then you got Calgary and San Jose who aren't very good. So I would say this is probably a 9 points out of 10 scenario. Best case scenario, you probably need to win all 5. And it comes down to, are they going to bounce back? You know, we talked about it. I agree with you 100%. I didn't think they played bad last night. There were 3 big mistakes that really cost them. They end up walking out of that game without any points. You can't have that in these upcoming games. And these teams are going to make a lot of the same mistakes as well. A lot of these, the Ottawa Senators, Minnesota, Calgary, San Jose, Vegas, they're mistake prone as well. It's not like you're playing Colorado. The reason they're good is because they don't make that many mistakes. And even with their C game like last night, they can get by and get 2 points.
Yep. I'll be curious to see what it looks like for the Blues against Ottawa last night. We've seen them in this spot before, and sometimes it's been underwhelming. I thought the same thing going into Anaheim, though. Anaheim was a spot where you typically expect a letdown. I didn't think the Blues played a great game, but they found a way to come away with a win. That's all I'm asking for. It's a pass-fail test right now. Get points, move on, see what the next game brings for you. Ottawa is a pass-fail test, and I'll be very curious to see how they operate within net, too. Because typically during the course of a season, this would be the game where you go to Hofer. You give him the opportunity against Ottawa on the road, and then you go to Minnesota. You give that one to Benner. You come back. It's a relatively quick turnaround at home against Vegas, but it's a must-win game. You go back to Benner. So you go back-to-back with Benner in the next 2. Right now, if ever there was a time to push him, it would be in these next three, where you say, you know what, Bennington, we got to push you right now in the playoffs. This is what the schedule's going to be like. We're going every other night. You're getting all of these opportunities. They're not going to go to Joel Hofer in the playoffs. If they make it, it will be exclusively Jordan Bennington, and it should be. He's earned that. The next three games, I would go to Bennington. I would just say, you're our guy, and we're gonna sink or swim with you in net, and I think that's probably the way he wants it, honestly.
Yeah, I agree with you. I would go with Benner the next three. Honestly, I think I would go with Benner the next five. I mean, this is such an important stretch for the St. Louis Blues, and I get it. You don't want to wear them down before the playoffs, but, man, if I'm worried about wearing them down before the playoffs, I may not make the playoffs. So I would probably go with them the next 5 games. I know that's a lot, but I maybe not against San Jose. I'd hear an argument like you should be able to beat the Sharks with Hofer. So I would definitely go with the next 4 with him. I'd even hear the argument for the next 5, but I think you're 100% right. Now is the time to push Jordan Bennington so you can have him in the playoffs.
Somebody on the text line said, BK, if the Blues lose against Ottawa, do you think it's fair to say they're done? I wouldn't say they're cooked, but if they've got like a 30% chance to make it to the playoffs right now, they would have to do something otherworldly to make it if they lose to Ottawa. That's the game. You have to have this game tomorrow night. You have to.
Yeah.
So are they done? It's hard for me to say that because I have left this team for dead time and time and time again, and the Western Conference has continued to open that door for them to run through. But this would be about as close as you can be.
Yeah, if you lose that game, you have to make up for it somewhere. You have to have a surprise victory then over like Edmonton in April or Nashville or Carolina. You have to make up for it somewhere if you end up losing to Ottawa. Just don't let that happen. Don't have to force yourself into a spot where you have to beat a better team. They've got to show up tomorrow. There's no excuses. I said this yesterday, and it sounded like a hype video. This is the St. Louis Blues playoff. These games are all playoff games for the St. Louis Blues. There's no excuse to not show up for that game.
He's T-Bone. That is Bradford Bruns, and I'm Brandon Kiley. We'll continue our breakdown of the NCAA tournament. The regional is the South. We're breaking it down with the best game, the most likely upset, the team we're picking to get out of it. Coming up next here on 101 ESPN.
The NCAA men's basketball tournament is on, and you can join 101 ESPN to watch the games this Thursday and Friday. Join BK and Ferrario and the Fast Lane live from Cyberg's in O'Fallon, Illinois on Thursday, and Helen Fitzgerald's on Friday. Come enjoy some food, a cold Bud Light, 101 giveaways, plenty of screens to watch all the games and more with BK and Ferrario and the Fast Lane live from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. Get more details at 101ESPN.com.
Brought to you by Bud Light. Easy to drink, easy to enjoy.
Miss the Blues game? Want to hear the highlights? Need player reaction? Want more analysis and opinion? It's all here on Curbside Reaction, your next day post-game podcast with the voice of the St. Louis Blues, Chris Kerber. Catch new episodes of Curbside every morning after every Blues game on 101ESPN.com or on the 101 mobile app. This is exactly where you want to be, listening to us. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
All right, it's time for our breakdown of the South region in this year's NCAA tournament. For those of you looking for your brackets, you're shuffling through the papers right now. This is the one with Houston and Marquette and Kentucky and Duke as your top four teams in the region. T-Bone, when you go through the bracket right now and you look at the top four in other regions, are you just like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Because Illinois got absolutely screwed.
They did get screwed. Because I looked at this one this morning as I was prepping. I was going, man, all these top teams, like, I've got a lot of upsets in this region.
Yeah, it's frustrating if you're an Illini fan, to say the least.
I hate the committee.
We go through each of these regions with the game to watch, the upset you're looking for in the first round, a sleeper team that could make a deep run, team you're confused by, you could see them getting out of the region, but could also see them losing in the first round, and the team that we are expecting to get out of the region. We'll go through this relatively quickly. T-Bone, what is the first round game you're most interested in watching?
The game that I'm most interested in is going to be James Madison versus Wisconsin, the 12 versus 5. Wisconsin's really good offensively. They're bad defensively. That's got a theme of the tournament, actually. James Madison's got 3 guys average in double figures. They are a really good kind of sleeper team. I like them as the 12 seed. I think that's going to be the best matchup because I think it's just going to be both offenses going back and forth.
I think it'll be a good matchup as well. I'm specifically, though, zeroing in on Nebraska and Texas A&M. I think this really does have the makings of a good one. It seems like a classic 8-9 that could go either way. Nebraska has a lot of scoring balance, right, among its top 4 scorers. But to me, if you look at A&M, the 1-2 punch that is there, actually, Redford as well as Taylor combined to go for about 35 per game. I think I'd give the slight edge in this instance to A&M.
You guys are going to think I'm crazy.
1 versus 16?
No, close though. 2-15.
Okay.
Marquette versus Western Kentucky. Not because I think Western Kentucky has a real good shot of being able to win this one, but when you play at the fastest tempo in all of college basketball, I'm interested in watching you play in that game, especially when you're a team that is not particularly good at handling the ball and you play at a really fast tempo and you're going up against a Shaka Smart defense. Yeah, I'll be tuning in for that one.
Not
Could
crazy.
be a complete blowout in favor of Marquette, but it's going to be a lot of fun to watch, I have to imagine. So I'll be interested in seeing how that one goes. Marquette slows teams down typically defensively, and Western Kentucky wants to play at the fastest tempo in all of college basketball. I'll tune in for that one. All right, the upset that you have in the first round. T-Bone, I'm going to your game that you just mentioned. I do have James Madison pulling off the upset in the classic 12-5. You're going to see this a lot. They're going to be a Cinderella team in a lot of teams, in a lot of people's brackets, but that's the one that I've got. I'm following the typical storm out there. I've got James Madison making it out of the first round against Wisconsin.
So I've got that one as well, but I'm going to go with the higher seed that I have as an upset. The Kentucky Wildcats are on upset watch for me.
Really?
They are a run, chuck it up, and throw it up. And if that's the case and it's not falling and they're inconsistent, I could see where Oakland hangs around in this one.
Talk about a bad defense, by the way, Kentucky.
Yeah, Oakland has played teams very well. I remember them playing Illinois, and they pushed the Illini for a little bit. If you can push the fighting Illini, you sure as hell can beat the Wildcats. So give me the 14-seed Oakland over Kentucky.
They tested themselves, by the way, in the non-con this year.
They did. They had a really tough
good
schedule.
teams.
I believe the number 6 seed, Texas Tech, had better watch out here because while I made fun of the ACC earlier in the program, NC State just did make it through the entire gauntlet during championship week, trending upward at the right time. Tech doesn't do anything particularly spectacular for my taste, whereas I will go with the best player on the floor. To me, the best individual talent here is DJ Horn, and I think he will be enough to at least get the Wolfpack through one game.
Hope that's not the case, because as we continue to go along here with our sleeper team from this region, it is Texas Tech for me. I have them beating NC State, beating Kentucky, beating Marquette, and getting to the Elite Eight in this region. So I have them going on a bit of a run here. I think that is a team worth watching. I like betting on the best conferences because I tend to believe that when you are as tested as you are coming out of either the Big Ten or the Big 12 this year, I think those were the two best conferences in college basketball. I think it sets you up pretty well for a tournament run. I think they are better than people are suggesting. I've got Texas Tech as my sleeper in this region. T-Bone?
So I don't have a real sleeper that can get to the Elite Eight. I do have Oakland getting to the Sweet 16 just because I find their path to be easy because I have NC State pulling off an upset as well. The one team I could see, though, because we're going to get to the most confounding here in a second, is Nebraska. I do like that Nebraska squad. I like Fred Hoiberg as a head coach. I love I don't know how to pronounce his name, but they say he's the Japanese Steph Curry, and I watched him play, and he is actually a legitimately good player.
That guy.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know his name, but he is really good. I can't pronounce it. I've watched him 3 times and still don't know how to say it. I could see where Nebraska could find a way. Tominaga? Yeah.
Tominaga?
I think that's how you say it. I really like his game, and I think he could be a guy that could become we talked about it going into the tournament. There's not a lot of names you recognize this year. He could be a guy that becomes a name in March Madness because of his play.
A team that you can actually catch in action tonight on 101 ESPN, playing in the first 4. Potential spoiler for me, guys. I actually like the Colorado Buffaloes quite a bit. To beat number 1, to beat Boise State. All right, to beat Boise State, really made a nice run in the Pac-12 tournament, lost to Oregon in the championship game of that tourney. And not only will Colorado take down Boise State this evening, but looking ahead, that means CU would get Florida in the first round. Florida, yes, made it to the SEC title game. However, not having its starting center being thrown, a little bit of upheaval right there. I like the draw that Colorado actually has and think it could make some noise and maybe even parlay that into the Sweet 16. Not going any farther, but maybe Sweet 16.
Interesting. That's a really interesting one. I could totally see it. Marquette is one of those teams that they just very matchup dependent on what you should expect out of them. A good team, no doubt about it. Certain matchups can be problematic for them. If you've got great guard play that handle the ball particularly well, you could beat that team in Marquette. So that'll be one worth monitoring for sure. All right, who's the team that you're most confused by? I'll get us started. It's Duke. It's Duke.
The Blue Devils?
I don't know what to make of any of these teams coming out of the ACC this year, man. It's just not a good... Normally, the ACC is an excellent basketball conference. This year, it very much is not. You had 3 teams come out of the conference to make the tournament. One of them is already out of the tournament with what we saw from that horrible performance last night by Virginia. I just don't know if they've been tested enough for me to really believe in them. In the non-con, yeah, they did beat Michigan State. They beat Baylor earlier this year. But... I don't know that this is a great team this time around. Filipkowski's good, but I don't like betting on a team that relies so heavily on a big man in the NCAA tournament. I want your guards to be the leaders. I don't know, man. I could totally see them coming out of this region. I could also see them losing to James Madison in the second round.
Sure.
It's the 1 seed. It's Houston. They're great defensively, but, man, offensively they can go through some struggles, and they're missing some guys that are going to be coming off the bench for the tournament. So I'm concerned. I mean, we just talked about Virginia in the first 4. Guys, they put up 41 in the Big 12 title game. Come on. How can I not be concerned after watching that?
It was ugly.
BK, I gave Duke a long look, but then I realized I feel exactly the same about the Blue Devils as I have in each of the past 3 to 4 seasons entering the NCAA tournament. So from a pure talent standpoint, Kentucky absolutely perplexes me.
That's a good one.
Think about the performance or lack thereof in the quarterfinals. When you go up against Texas A&M and basically don't show up for long stretches of that game, this program, this team has all the talent in the world, led by Antonio Reeves. You know that he could pop off for 20-plus at any time. They've got 5 different guys who can put it up there in double figures. But from one game to the next, one setting to the next, depending on the region, depending on the destination, you don't really know what you're going to get. And we saw that throughout the better part of the conference schedule.
Once again, team that doesn't play any defense. All right, next one up. Final thing here as we go through the South region, our NCAA tournament breakdown. We'll finish this thing up tomorrow as we get through the Midwest region as we're kicking things off tomorrow for the NCAA tournament. My winner in this region is the one that T-Bone is confused by, and it is Houston. I have Houston coming out of it. I'm going chalk with the number 1 seed. It's one of 2 number 1 seeds that I have going to the Final Four. I've got Houston coming out of the South this year.
I've got Marquette. I think offensively they're going to be good enough to get through the tournament. I think defensively they'll be good and they can force turnovers. I think they're going to get through. Now, granted, I also have an easier path for them because of a bunch of upsets in the bottom portion of this, but I think Marquette's the one that wins this region.
Yeah, bottom line for me, Marquette, obviously I feel as if Marquette's going to be eliminated relatively early. I, too, like Houston. You're not playing Iowa State again, fortunately, for the Cougars fans. There are 2 losses to Iowa State during the season. There were a couple of skeptical defeats, but honestly, if I'm trusting any team in the nation, maybe outside of a UConn, it has to be Houston for the body of work, the speed, the rate, the frequency, obviously, at which this team can play. I think that Sampson has this team primed to make a deep run, and the region certainly helps.
Tomorrow, we'll break down the Midwest, where we've got a classic, the Purdue Boilermakers.
Is Mizzou in this one? We haven't talked about them yet for the tournament.
Hey, they got a big ad yesterday.
Okay.
Going to the portal, getting a 6'8" wing that can shoot it.
I heard about their success in the portal last season.
Yeah, well, 2 years ago, the portal success was unprecedented.
2 years ago, they had this guy that he went to the NBA. What was his name? Oh, Kobe Brown.
Well, this year they're going to be able to do that via the portal. They're bringing in a top 5 recruiting class to pair with it. Boom. And they're getting back to the NCAA tournament in 2025. By the way, a team to watch in the Midwest region. That KU squad has like 7 starters, don't count my math on it, that are out going into the tournament. That's going to be worth monitoring as they head into that game against Samford. I think the line in that is only 7 points now for KU versus Samford. Yeah, man, those injury issues are real for KU heading into the tournament. We'll hit the rewind coming up next.
College hoops are on ESPN tonight. The first 4. Coverage starts at 5:30. Your home for the NCAA is 101 ESPN. Louis. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN. Let's run it back with a daily rewind on BK and Ferrario. Brought to you by Gloria Lou, your home sold guaranteed realty. Selling your home begins at GloriaHasTheBuyers.com.
Anything from today's show, be sure to check it out on the podcast page at 101ESPN.com, and the free 101 ESPN app is where you go to find it. It's all presented by
Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers.
You guys can always check us out on YouTube as well. During the show, after the show, it's all posted over there for you in its entirety at youtube.com/101ESPN STL. If you want to come out, say hello, watch some NCAA tournament basketball with us, you can do so tomorrow at Cyberg's in Illinois. We'll be there from 11 to 2. I think some of us might stick around a little bit after the show, depending on how things work scheduling-wise, but the Fast Lane will certainly be there as well. 2 to 6 o'clock, broadcasting live Cyberg's in O'Fallon tomorrow, and on Friday, we'll be out at Helen Fitzgerald's on Lindbergh. So if you want full details on that, check it out at 101ESPN.com. For the rewind today, we'll finish things up where we began, and that is with the St. Louis Blues. A tough one last night for them. They end up losing at home 4-3. It's 3 real mistakes that end up losing it for you. It was unforced errors. Buchnevich with a bad turnover in his own end. Kyrou with a bad penalty. And then the first 2 power plays, I can forgive you for not scoring on those if you're the Blues. That third one, when they didn't score, I think there was like 4 minutes to go at the end of it. At that point, I think everybody knew they're just not going to be able to get away with a point in this one. I didn't feel terrible about the loss, honestly. Thought they played reasonably well against a team that's flat out better than them, but that was your mulligan. Now you got to win each of these next 3. They become must-wins because you lost that one last night.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I didn't think they played bad, and I'm a skeptic of the St. Louis Blues. So now they got to win the next 3, and they got to get Kyrou and Buchnevich going. They're going to be on a line together, it looks like, tomorrow night in Ottawa. Those two got to start playing better, and Kyrou's going through a rut right now. Buchnevich has just 4 points in his last 10 games, and 3 of those 4 points came in one game, and that was against the Ducks. So for them to be able to win these games, not only do they have to play well as a team, of course, but they need Kyrou and Buchnevich to get going offensively.
Yeah, that's going to be a big one to watch. Neighbors on the top line will be interesting to see for an entire game. It's something we've been calling for a long time. They're finally, it appears, going to commit to that, but we've seen this before. They could change that in the second period. It wouldn't be a shock to anybody, depending on how things go in the first. On the Cardinals side of things, they are down in spring training. They've got a game tonight that they're going to be playing against the Nationals. They have decided to go with Victor Scott once again in center field with Jordan Kyrou in right. I said if they do it again, if they go to Victor Scott yesterday in center, all right, cool. It had been like 6 days since he had played in a spring training game. Of course, they're going to get him an opportunity. Doing it in back-to-back days with Jordan Kyrou getting another opportunity and both of them being at the top of your order and Carlson being in right, that feels meaningful to me.
Yeah, I agree with you. It feels meaningful, and I still believe that right now, as of today, Victor Scott is the starting center fielder for the St. Louis Cardinals. I think if they want their best offense and defensive alignment, it will be Scott in center, probably Donovan in left, in my opinion, and Burleson's the DH.
He's Tanner Hendrickson. That is Bradford Bruns. I'm Brandon Kiley. Huge shout out to Bradford for filling in on short notice. We're hoping Alex is back in with us tomorrow. It'll all just depend on if he's able to get out there with him being a little under the weather. So wishing him nothing but the best. The Fast Lane certainly dealing with some sicknesses as well. So coming up next, the Fast Lane from 2 to 6 here on 101 ESPN.
March Mayhem is here. The madness of March tips off this week with first and second round action on 101 ESPN. From Cinderella stories to bracket busters, hear all the madness on 101 ESPN.
Courtesy of Saliga Heating and Cooling, your independent American Standard heating and air conditioning dealer.
See the entire March Mayhem schedule now at 101ESPN.com.